Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life, episode 216. My name is NBZ, and I have been consumed, Bally, by the Elden Ring. I've been taken over. It's drowning me, and that's a video game that's happened, and apparently is the best reviewed thing since The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. It's crazy. It's been 5 years, and
so they're both sitting on 96, right?
I think 97 maybe on Metacritic. I think the OpenCritic is slightly different, but it's not often that you get a game that scores this highly. I remember, when Breath of the Wild reviews came out, and I was like, "Holy shit, this is very, very good." Apparently, I think we were predicting its review scores before it came out, and we were very lowballing it compared to the absolutely glowing reviews that did happen. So
but I think that's also partly to do with. We think that review scores are getting harder and harsher, and it's a little bit trickier than it was.
Yeah, critics are getting a lot more punishing when it comes to certain types of approaches to storytelling and things like that, and gameplay mechanics. But there's also this factor of, I think a lot of the critics who are harsher are also the outlets that don't do review scores, right? So like Polygon and Waypoint and like Eurogamer,
like Last of Us Part 2, and
they don't actually give review scores, those more critical outlets, which makes it so that the rest of the people who play it just end up giving it very high review scores.
I think Elden Ring's got another couple of things going for it. I think one is it's doing something new with an existing popular formula.
Yeah.
And I think two, because it's an existing popular formula, the reviewers reviewing it are by and large going to be from software experienced people, and they kind of know what they're getting themselves in for, which think will also help those scores. So.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. But it's a crazy thing. I have been playing it a lot. Bally, not yet, but it seems like, given what people are saying,
I'd like to get to it this year, definitely.
Yeah, definitely an interesting video game. But we're not going to be talking about that today, because we got Nintendo video game to be talking about and other fun stuff. Bally, how are you doing? How have things been so far?
Oh, just busy with games and the world and all these things. And
yes.
Yeah, it's that there's a lot of cool stuff coming out, and it's coming out
almost too much, you might say.
It's coming out very soon, and I was just about to say there was also like the Nintendo Switch Sports thing that happened that we need to add to our list of things to talk about.
Yes, that's a good point. Yes.
So there's just so much happening.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a lot of stuff to discuss on the show today. Bally, do you want to tell everyone what it will be?
Today we've got a 3-segment show. For this first segment, we're going to talk about the games that we have been playing. For the second segment, we're going to talk about your emails. And then for the third segment, Nintendo are shutting down the Wii U and 3DS eShops. And we're going to jump in with our thoughts on that as well. Absolutely,
yeah. A lot of craziness going on around that, and obviously Sony did that a while ago, and people pushed back and they stopped it. It's Nintendo, and so people realized that pushing back is pointless.
A groundswell of opposition will result in any change in this occasion, but we can get to that.
It's funny, I've not really seen anyone push back and say, Nintendo, don't do this, because it's almost like everyone just is agreed to the fact that they won't listen to us, exactly. So we're just not even going to bother. But we'll get into that. That'll be fun to discuss, give people recommendations, that type of thing. So but let's kick things off with video games we've been playing. Good point, Bally. Switch Sports. I totally forgot that happened, but we played it. I only played one session of it. I think you did the same. We both did the same.
For a whole 45 minutes, we could also be a Nintendo employee.
We could, we could just test it and not talk about it on social media, of course. I think we're just breaking the rules even talking about it here.
Podcasts don't count. They didn't say podcast. They
exactly,
just said
not under the
media,
rules. So we're not breaking any embargoes here. So Switch Sports, obviously very much just a iteration on the Wii Sports idea. They had 3 things that you could take part in, which was tennis, bowling, and Chambara, I believe, is the sword fighting one. And I proceeded to get bowling for like 6 times in a row, and was like, fucking hell, video game, give me something else.
I had a nice consistent balance where it rotated every single time, and I think I played 6 or 7 games total, and I did like 2 of each. So for some reason I was on the much more even rotation.
Yeah, that should have been how it was for everyone, I think. But for some reason, they kept pairing me into bowling sessions. I was like, look, this bowling is fun, but I would like to try tennis once, please, so that I can actually have something to take away from it and see if anything has changed. But maybe let's start with bowling, because I think that's the one that's changed the most. It's this really interesting setup, because Wii Sports obviously was an offline game, right? You played it in person with people. There was a limit of 4 players for all the games and all that sort of stuff, and usually it was like 2 players. But now that it's online, and obviously this is not the first online Wii Sports title, because if you paid attention during the Wii U era, there was an online version of Wii Sports that existed, and that Bally and I played online, and was a good time, like playing golf and tennis and all that stuff online on Wii U was great. I enjoyed it a lot. But this is kind of changing things up, because the bowling is now a battle royale question mark, where basically there are 16 players and everyone takes their first 3 shots, and whoever does the worst gets eliminated. So it's like this eliminator round thing where you just keep going and the person who has the highest score at the end wins, but it's all based around how high your score is consistently going forward, because otherwise you'll get eliminated from the pool of players. How far did you make it in bowling, Bally? Did you get to the final? Did you manage to win a bowling?
I think I got through like a couple of rounds and never got further than that, and there were already some pretty good people. One thing I will say about bowling is I liked on the Wii Sports version that you're basically releasing the B button as a trigger, like your fingers are in the ball. And it feels it's a bit more simulation like in that sense, because you're kind of like pulling your arm back, and then as your hand is making contact with the floor like you would in a bowling alley, you're releasing the ball and you're releasing the B button at just the right moment. And then in this version there's no release button at all, which I really dislike, because when you swing your arm, it's like your arm reaches the peak of its swing and then the ball releases from a greater height, and when you release the ball from a greater height, it loses some of its spin. So like if you're trying to line up like a curled spin kind of shot, as it were, that you're kind of meant to do with bowling, that's the most consistent way of getting a strike. A lot of the spin came off my ball, and I really I don't know what I was doing wrong in order to release it at the point at which the ball makes contact with the floor, but I'd love if anyone wants to email in and let me know how to do that, because it was really frustrating me. I still managed to get a few strikes here and there, but I didn't have that nice consistency. It didn't feel as nice as Wii for some reason.
Yeah, I think we were speculating that maybe they changed it because of the Wii days where people would let go of the button but then also let go of their Wii remote and it would careen into their TV, and
so we're being punished by a stupid few people who are releasing their entire Wii remote when you're just meant to release the B button.
But also, like, no one is wearing straps with Joy-Cons, right? Like, it's just not gonna happen. It's such a pain.
I definitely was. Were you?
Oh no, I was not.
Really?
I don't even know where those fucking clips are. I think they're back home. Like, then I don't use them.
Yeah, the first thing I did was like, I'm strapping this on because I don't want to throw my I was gonna say Wiimote, my Joy-Con across the room.
Yeah, I probably should, but who cares? You know, like I know my strength.
You'll care until the moment that it goes through your screen, and then you will care. Yes.
Well, the Joy-Con's lighter. You know, it's
That's
less weighty. It's fine. But yeah, I think bowling was fun. I do like the switch up with the Battle Royale style to it. But yeah, again, as you mentioned, it's a strange decision to change, and there is a like kind of lack of consistency when it comes to spin and like angle. Like I felt like when I span one way, sometimes it would go the other. So I feel like there's a bit of tweaking there, and also just as we mentioned before, the motion and gyro stuff in the Switch controllers are. They have to be recalibrated very often. Like Skyward Sword and Mario Galaxy were very clear with this, of like, if you're using pointer controls especially, you really have to recalibrate them, but also like where you are in positional space, like making sure that it is it makes logical sense and that it works is really important, and something that I don't know if they have figured out yet. But anyway, bowling was fun. Chumbara I enjoyed quite a bit, which was basically, it's like the sword fighting game from Resort, where you can block incoming moves depending on where they're coming from. You can kind of like try and get an angle on them. It's basically Skyward Sword before Skyward Sword, where you were kind of learning how to do sword fighting and opening up your enemy and stuff like that, all except that it's multiplayer and you're fighting against other people who are also very good at like figuring out like angles and things, and there's a nice tension to it. Like I enjoyed it quite a bit of going back and forth, and they have a few different swords that you get access to. One of them is like a double katana, one of them is like a charge blade, and there's like some charge stuff that you can do to improve your ability to break through guards and that type of thing. How did you feel about this sword fighting thing?
This was my favorite. Like, as you can predict, I stuck with the vanilla sword the entire time.
Of course, yeah.
But it was definitely my favorite. It feels close. It feels like a genuine competition. I think the skill level of the people I was playing was very, very similar to mine, and that felt very satisfying when I beat them, because it was that satisfaction of, okay, they're coming at me in this way, I'm going to block like this, and I think they're not protecting themselves in this angle, therefore I'm going to attack like this. And it's just that kind of waiting, and it's kind of like being a Jedi. You're kind of like anticipating their moves. It feels really good, and I wasn't having any issues with like recalibrating or anything, and it was very seamless, and I was very impressed by just this game generally. And I think more widely, all the games, I like the new redesign. We're not on Woohoo Island anymore, or if we are, we're in like some secret underground bunker or something, but like we're in some sort of new, slightly more futuristic looking place, and I think it's just a really nice world that they've created, and I love the whole look of the game. But yeah, Chambara like evoked that look very well, because it was just a really nice location.
Yeah, I think my time playing Vader Immortal in VR has helped with like blocking in right directions and things like that. So yeah, that definitely was helpful. Although I got down to a kind of sudden death against this one other person, because we kind of drew all the way through, and then I lost that, so I was very disappointed. I kind of went for the quick hit and accidentally bonked off of their sword, and they were able to knock me down. So yeah, it's cool, and it's very.
That's what I like, is that you're not always rewarded for agility. You're rewarded for accuracy and
patience as well.
Patience, like, exactly. So if you are patient and make the right block, then you block them, then they will be stunned briefly, and you can get your attack, and then which feels very Jedi-like, very impressive.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then there's tennis, and it's pretty much tennis from Wii.
It's the most similar out of the three by a mile, in my opinion.
Yeah,
it genuinely felt near identical. I wasn't able to get a fast serve, and I don't know if they've still got that included in it.
No, neither was I. Like, that always was one of those things that we learned the timing of on Wii, and eventually, Bally, you were so good that you did it every single time, and I was like, shit, how do I beat this man? He's too good. But yeah, I could not nail that timing once when I was playing this. So
no, I played 2 or 3 matches of tennis and didn't get a single one. And I must say the people I was playing in tennis in particular were shockingly, horrendously bad.
Now, were you playing both characters in tennis? Because I had this weird situation where it was 2 of me, it was just duplicates of me, and then 2 separate people on the other team. Were you with someone else?
Okay. No, I was always 2 duplicates of me, and I thought that was the only mode they had. So that is surprising. You were facing 2 different people.
So when you were facing opponents, they were 2 duplicates of one person, right?
Both times, yeah.
Oh, weird. Yeah, so that's interesting.
I would love it if they included a singles mode, or could do something, or you could actually play a genuine doubles where you and me are on the same team, MBZ, and we could play the computer or someone else. Like, I'd love that, and I don't think we'll get it, but I'd love to see it, because it's crazy how, like, this is a 2007 game, and it, like, that one, it feels like they've literally just copy and pasted it from the 2007 game and given it a glow up, and if
they nailed it out of the bat. I think that's what you can say about Wii Sports Tennis.
It does feel good. I don't think it feels bad. I would just like a little more choice and a little more finesse, perhaps. I don't know. It just needs
that makes sense.
Something extra. I feel like golf, for example. I know this demo didn't have golf, but I feel like there golf, and perhaps even in something like a baseball, there are a lot more variables, and I think they're mechanically stronger games than the tennis has ever been. I know that's just my opinion, but like, it just feels like there's more variety.
I always liked the mini games for tennis. I didn't play as much of just regular tennis. That was always like, if someone came around, we'd play that. But on my own, I always went into the kind of like hit it off the wall rebounding, like me versus myself almost type of stuff. That was always a lot of fun. And I think for this game to succeed and do really well, I think it has to have a few things. I think it has to have a lot of modes and options for each game, like Wii Sports had, and just improve on that, like have even more. But then also I think there should be some kind of ranking online leaderboard system that gives you progression and you unlock like
just needs these modern things that have changed in the gaming scene since 2007 that just need to be added. And mechanically, by and large, it's that the games are strong. They are fun. I had a good time. And I think the fact that this game, I think it's going to be £35, like
it's $31.99.
31, like that's cheap, especially for the UK. And so it's good it's got that low price point. It just needs those modes, and I'm confident that they're going to do like waves of content as well, could also give it a boost. So it's a busy year, but I still think this game's got a very good chance of doing very, very well.
Yeah, definitely. It speaks to a wide audience, and a lot of people we're at a point where nostalgia is very high for this type of game, so I think it's going to absolutely kill it. And a lot of people will be jumping on day one, playing it online.
It's coming out April 29th, I think.
Yeah, it's end of that point, and one of their big releases for the year. Every month seems like it has something at least, and that is very good. It's very it's shaping up to be a really good year for Nintendo, and also I will say that online worked really well. Like I didn't have any issues.
Yeah, very good, very good.
That's a positive
sign.
You
cannot always say about Nintendo, and that's even with all those people funneled into those 45 minutes. So that was good to see.
Yeah, it was a stress test in a lot of ways, and it worked, and I think that bodes well. Just the idea that they're doing a test like this bodes well, right? Because, they haven't done that too much in the past.
It's very unlike Nintendo. I mean, they've done it since ARMS, but before then it was like, wow, Nintendo are actually doing an online test rather than just launching.
I actually think the first one they ever did was original Splatoon. Like on Wii U, they did it on Splatoon 1. They had a test. Yeah.
It was a huge deal then, wasn't it? It was like, wow, this is Nintendo with a multiplayer online shooter. They're testing like what is going on with the world.
It's crazy, man. Crazy. But yeah, looking forward to checking out the full thing when it comes out. Bally, you and I finished up OlliOlli World, a fantastic game. Definitely in my favorites list for this year. Really, really enjoyed it. How did you find kind of the end of that game and going through some of the last levels and things like that?
It's just such a fantastic package, I think. So my aim, I was less interested in high scores other than our rivalry at the moment.
That continues unabated.
Get to that, but my aim was to beat every level in the game without using checkpoints. So I definitely had the most fun in, say, World 3. I think they had a few more mechanics. You got this mechanic where you have to do a grab move on your board in order to shatter like these purple crystals. I just thought that was a great mechanic, and there's some really nice, like, just the flow of grinding and jumping and breaking through these crystals, and then like landing on stairs and having to like land properly, and it's a really seamless, impressive system. And I had the most fun in World 3. I'd say that World 4 was the toughest. There were a few levels there in particular. It took me a lot of tries to kind of like try and get through them without using the checkpoints. And then I think World 5 was slightly easier than World 4. And it was often like World 5, it felt like the levels could be very short if you wanted them to be. But if you wanted to take the external like exits on routes, you could go for some much longer routes to sort of rack up those high scores. Like World 5 felt like it was very high score driven. So I had a great time with it. I think what I love is that the game is designed in a very good way for someone like me who just wants to take what they want from the game. Like it can be aimed at someone who wants to get a high score in every single level versus someone who just wants to beat the game versus someone like me who's maybe a bit of a hybrid where I want to beat all the levels without using the checkpoints, but maybe not go for all the challenges and high scores. And I think there's a lot of tiers of people who will get enjoyment from this game, and I think it caters to all of them, which is actually quite a hard thing to do generally in video games. So I was hugely impressed.
Yeah, it just has so many ways to approach it, and I'm the type of person with this game who I took a much longer time, I think, just because every level I was like, okay, I need to finish this, so I'll just get to the end. And then every level I got to, I was like, oh, I want to do it again. It just feels like you're robbing yourself of the experience by playing through it once and finishing it, because every level has multiple paths and has other challenges associated with it that you want to.
I still spent about 13-14 hours with the game, by the way. Like, it took me a long time.
For sure. But like even above and beyond that is like having the ability to just learn these levels really intimately is, I think, part of what makes this game so good, right? Like it's about trying to know, okay, this spot is really hard. I need to have this amount of speed going into this ramp to make sure that I land this grind, so that I need to set all this stuff up. Like you start making plans and kind of plotting out the best route. Like, how do I do this entire level in one combo? Like that's kind of for me, the end goal is like being able to do that on every level, and that sounds really fucking hard but the thing is, every level is built for it, right? Like sometimes there'll be a random grind rail and the regular person will be like, why is that there? It doesn't seem like it makes logical sense. But from the perspective of someone who is trying to manual every single section and keep your combo going, it will be like, oh, that's there because that's the exact spot where you would have run out of manuals and you would have had to grind on that thing to reset your combo, basically, so that when the exclamation mark comes up, otherwise you would have lost it, right? So every level is built around those ideas, and there are multiple paths that some are called the gnarly route, which weirdly a lot of the time I found easier to access the gnarly route than the non-gnarly route, and oftentimes I found it easier to do that one than the regular one as well, which is a little weird. Sometimes I felt maybe they're a little mislabeled, but I really like what the game does with scale, because I don't think the first couple of worlds that we talked about last time really did this. I think it's from World 3 onwards where the camera really gets zoomed out on certain sections, and you have to see like these massive kind of grinds and massive walls that you're riding along, and just like getting the timing correct on them because you're so far away can be quite tricky, because just nailing exactly when you're going to land on the grind, like it's sometimes quite easy to miss. But I love the kind of scope of it and just how big it gets in terms of the places you're traversing and the kind of skate parks and all the grinds and rails that you're going down. It's really breathtaking in a lot of senses. And there's also, I will say that as a Switch version, generally fantastic performance across the board, like generally holds 60 really nicely. I think World 4 in particular has sections that it definitely chugs a little, like slows down in a sense that sometimes it made it hard for me to nail the timing because it felt like the frame rate was kind of throwing me off. And that's just going to be at the higher end of play, like just making sure that you are nailing every single moment of it. Sometimes it was just a little chuggy in spots, and that's, I think, just testament to the fact that there's a lot of complicated stuff going on in the background sometimes, and you got these shards of glass breaking and all these other things happening that make it a little harder to approach from a technical standpoint. But I think just visually the game is still gorgeous and just has such a unique, fantastic style to it. Really just the game that I would pick up and play the most of. I'll just pick up and play a couple of rounds, do a couple of runs, see if I can do it. If not, I'll just put it down for a while, pick it up again. Like it's such a, this is the reason I haven't been playing Ring Fit Adventure, because I don't want to close OlliOlli World down because I'm like in the middle of a run and I want to start it again later in the day and stuff like that. It does make me wish for a kind of a suspend feature on Switch. That would be very, very nice.
And if anyone out there has OlliOlli World and you want to try and jump in and battle me and MBZ when it comes to Lilo Lane in World 1, it's a very specific course. We are currently...
It's so weird how that got chosen. It was just like you tweeted me being like, well, it's took me for ages to beat MBZ's score on this, and it was like 46,000 or something pathetic now that is like way, way beyond, our
now we're both like in the world's top 30 or 40.
Yeah, so this thing kept going, and Bally got a score that I was like, shit, that's really high. I don't want to think about that right now. And so I like took a break for a while, came back after like learning a bit more and doing a bit more later in the game, and then went back to it and was like, all right, let's give a good go at this. And I played and I eventually set a score that was high enough. And then I was like, okay, let me look at the 2 million score here. What did that guy do? And he was doing some crazy shit, but I was like, okay, I'm going to try and emulate kind of what he's doing. And then I was able to do a score of like 700 something thousand. So that's currently where the bar is. I think it's like 765k is where I got it to. And that's like...
So we're talking like you need a score of like 8 to 10,000 that is then multiplied roughly 80 to 100 times. That's kind of like how to get a score that high.
As we mentioned, you have to do the level in one single combo. which means that when you don't, the way you build up combo is you have grinds, and the grind rail, depending on how many times you grind, will like multiply and multiply the combo. But between grinds, you need to have a way of keeping that going, which is where manuals come in. And manuals are basically like you on your board, kind of like at an angle, grinding with just the front wheels or the back wheels, and that can go for 3 times in a row. So you can have 3 manuals before you have to reset your grind. And so like making sure that you do that throughout the entire level is tantamount, or paramount I should say, to ensuring the highest score possible. But you also have to be, while you're doing this, spinning with a shoulder button, using the left stick to spin and do tweaks and rotations as well, or grabbing your board, I guess. You also have to be using your left stick to be turning to do the highest grade tricks you possibly can. So it is like, if you talk about rubbing your stomach and patting your head or whatever, this is like, imagine that times 4, where you have all these things going on, and it's going really fast at the same time, and you have to make sure that the timing is perfect. It's such a, this is why I love this game, is us going back and forth doing this shit. This is like the perfect distillation of what makes OlliOlli World good, is like that real mastery of a level of just like, okay, I'm just gonna do this again and again until I just get the perfect run, and my god is it satisfying when you post a high score on that.
The good thing about Lilo Lane is it's more or less one of the first courses in the whole game where you first get, you've learned how to jump, you know how to grind rail, you know how to land, like you've got enough there where you are doing the fundamental basics of OlliOlli World, but it's not like the crazy later levels where you are worrying about this jump and dying and hitting this, and it's a simple enough level where you can beat it fairly easily, consistently, which is nice, because it means we can just kind of focus on going for those high scores. So
absolutely,
definitely do give it a go, because we need some more rivalry. And I will check back in. MBZ is a good 100,000 above my score at the moment, at least. So I need to check back in and beat that score.
Yeah, I definitely will be picking this up again and again throughout the year, just going back and doing challenges and trying to do all of them. I think you did it where every single level you did in one run without checkpoints, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I towards the end, I was just like, oh, I'm just going to finish this now. So I didn't actually go for all those, but I'm going to go back and do all that as well. I think that's going to be a fun way to dig in and get a lot more out of the game. And and also there's also daily runs, which I remember back with OlliOlli 1, I did a bunch of daily run stuff as well, which is a lot of good fun. So there's plenty, ample reason to go back to it.
So much in this game.
Yeah, as I mentioned, like OlliOlli World is kind of the reason I play video games. It is pure movement distilled into a game. That's what this game is. It's just pure movement and momentum, and it just feels fucking fantastic. It's just so good.
The best skateboarding game?
I mean, I haven't played a lot of skateboarding games, but I
haven't
say
either,
so.
but this is my favorite.
I mean, this is a funny thing, because like it's kind of a platformer, it is a skateboarding game.
But I know what you mean. It's more platforming perhaps than it necessarily is skateboarding, but there's a whole lot of skateboarding jargon and moves and lore, as it were.
It shares more in common with Mario than it does with Tony Hawk, I think, in some senses. In other ways, no, but it's almost like Trials, like the Trials series, which is like this biking game, but it's also this kind of tricky, puzzly platformer.
I'd say it's closer to Bit Trip Runner than Tony Hawk. If you're
that's a good point.
Mario as an example,
I made a bad example. You're right. Yeah, something like a runner almost. That is a bit more similar because of the momentum and the kind of single run nature of it that you want to nail. I also think the later worlds, I'd only played the first couple of worlds last time, but worlds 3, 4, and 5, I think they all look really nice, like designs, and I think it's a very fun art style and world building that they've gone for with this game. It's just really zany and bizarre, and it's a real nice complement to what's just such a solid physics mechanics based game. Yeah, it's awesome. Check it out. I think this is one that will probably come to Game Pass as well later in the year. I imagine it will do. But the Switch version we can abide by is very, very good. So check it out. Bally, we both played a shorter narrative game, and I think this is one that I've heard a lot of good things about over the years, and was very interesting to me. It's called If Found.
Came out in 2020, I want to say.
Yeah, around that point in time. And I guess from your perspective, what did you know about this going in? Did you have any idea of what kind of game it was?
I knew absolutely nothing, and honestly, I think we were maybe on Skype together, and I was just running through like games in the eShop. I think you were running through games on your wish list, and I was like trying to copy your wish list. Like, what would I be interested in? What should I add to my wish list? And then I think Fan was one of those games, and it was either on sale or it was very cheap. And
it was on sale earlier this year. It's like I think end of last year, because I bought that Super Meat Boy Forever and a bunch of other stuff like Everhood, like Hunt Down, a bunch of things. So yeah,
and so basically, I'm always looking for kind of often shorter stuff, but definitely Switch focused stuff. Just stuff we can talk about on the show. And so I knew absolutely nothing, and I really, really enjoyed this game. I think it's done incredibly well. I'm not the biggest visual novel kind of person, and I've not played a ton of those games, but I thought this was just such a fantastic game. I should say
it's really well done, and in some senses, I wouldn't necessarily call it a visual novel. It's I would say it's more like a narrative game. I think this shares more in common with Night in the Woods than it does with like Danganronpa. Like that's the type of game this is. It's
yes, if there was a lot of Night in the Woods vibes for sure.
It feels very literary, right? Like it feels like a kind of almost like a short indie film in a way. That's the kind of vibe you get from it. The only thing I knew about going into it, that it was like an identity story about a trans character, and I thought that was a cool idea, and obviously trans people involved in the making of it, and a lot of, I think, biographical elements taken from the lives of the people who were involved in this. It's set in Ireland between like the early 90s and late 90s.
It's 1993 in Achill, which is an island just off the west coast of Ireland, Republic of Ireland. And it, what I thought was so unique about that setting was it's not the most far and distant kind of location and time period that we're used to, like growing up in Edinburgh. Like Ireland, for many American listeners, Ireland has a lot of similarities with Scotland, but then there are lots of things in other ways that are very different to Scotland. And I think it's that kind of the ways that it's similar, for example. And this game is what's great about this game is it's definitely got a glossary that's designed for an American audience. And what I mean by that is there are lots of words and things that are referred to, and I knew half of the things it referred to, and the other half were the far more Irish things that I didn't know, which was really interesting. So there was a glossary of words for like chipper, which is like a chip shop, and that's a word used a lot in Scotland as well as Ireland and this sort of thing. But there was something. So Ireland's obviously a very Catholic country, and that plays into a lot of it's kind of the characters and all the other things with the game. But I hadn't realized that in the Republic of Ireland they have like this prayer that goes out on across all media stations. So it goes off at like midnight, midday, and 6 a.m, and so it's every 6 hours. And I hadn't realized that at all. So I thought the setting was just really interesting, and obviously
just gives you really great historical context for the time, but also like these unique Irish parts of culture, right, that you wouldn't have known about otherwise. And that was interesting, because there were certain words that popped up and I'm like, I know what that means, but this is clearly being made because American people will play this and will have no idea what it's referring to. There's a bit of a cross section.
There's reference to like an Irish breakfast versus a Scottish breakfast, and like black pudding, haggis, and white pudding, and these the differences between the three, and just little stuff like that. It's like, wow, this game feels a lot closer to home than I'd appreciated.
I think for me, one of the best things this game does is pairing like the way you interact with it with the narrative, and the way that this game works is so unique is that so you can use the touchscreen or you can use the analog sticks, and you have this eraser basically, and you
can also tap a button that will automatically erase the whole screen, by the way. I only just realized that later.
I actually don't think I ever realized that. I was doing it manually the whole time.
The X button on Switch, but
oh, interesting. Yeah, and you were using sticks, and I mainly was using touchscreen. Do you play it mostly handheld, though?
I played the whole thing handheld, yeah.
Yes, so did I. And I think the smart thing about it, right, is this idea. The story is about identity for all these different characters, and like kind of struggling with that idea back in this time period where there was just a lot less kind of resources or just like understanding or kind of knowledge of being gay or being trans or having like different kind of identities. And the game is about like the lack of understanding from family members or from parts of society, and these people having to kind of go off on their own and live their own life and like be away from society and almost hidden. And the mechanic of erasure, right, like erasing the identity, is such an interesting concept when put together with the narrative, because that's what you're doing. You're kind of like getting rid of one scene to transition to the next one, and you're kind of like changing it, with your finger on the touchscreen or using the tools with the analog sticks. I just thought it was a very smart way to approach this idea. And you can also talk about it from the perspective of like, this is getting rid of, like, not getting rid of, but like there's a lot of issues, I think, in terms of those communities of suicide and those types of things, and the idea of these identities being erased because society is very much against them, is kind of built into that idea of erasure as well. So there's just a lot of layers and a lot of things that you can kind of take out of this game and the way it's built. But I also think it's really beautiful in the way that you interact with the screen and kind of like almost paint over things, and they'll do some really cool transition effects of like, there's a house and you'll kind of like paint over it, and then it'll kind of open up the inside and it will zoom in and show you kind of a closer look at the characters inside. And there's lots of that stuff going on throughout the game.
I felt the thing it conveyed so well to me was just like this kind of like sense of loneliness. So
yeah,
don't want to give away, it's not really story spoilers because it's a very simple story, but it's almost like the way it's told is so impactful through the game. But the character that you're following most closely, Cassio, she basically like runs away from home, as it were, and it's this idea that they convey very well that when she's at home, she's got a roof and warmth and shelter and this, but her brother and her mom, they kind of reject her identity entirely and want her to dress up as a boy and these kinds of things. So Cassia rejects that and finds these other group of LGBT people, and she obviously identifies much more closely with them, but the downside of living with them is that they basically live in this house that's falling apart, like it's an abandoned property.
Right.
And it's this, I think I always felt very anxious playing the game, because at no point does Cassio have the combination of the security within herself of being, identified for who she is, at the same time as having a shelter. It felt like she was always being torn between the two, or, if found, it's like finding, I don't know, I've read it as like Cassio finding that, security and bouncing between the two. And likewise, she meets like kind of, not bumps in the road, like she has conflicts with some of the other people in the house when they say, I'm sick of being rejected by society, and they say, I just want to be normal, and it's like they're rejecting, they don't want to be LGBT, they say they just want to be straight, or how Western Irish society is wanting them to be. And then at that point Cassio's like, but this is who we are, like we need to find ourselves, and this is
right, this
is important. And just I think the game does a great job of contextualizing how damn difficult that is for them in that moment in time, and that the way that there's real highs and lows in this game. And I think the soundtrack is actually phenomenal, where
it's really good.
I think it really, and this is another, I'm jumping around a bit, but maybe this is where it does elevate it above purely reading things on a page. It's just like the contextualizing these highs and lows with music, I think is just so, like, it really just made me, it's kind of like those moments in what's the game with like 5 different chapters that came out across a million years?
Kentucky Route Zero.
Kentucky Route Zero, like some of the musical moments in that game.
Yeah,
I felt
totally.
like these were stronger in this game because I really understood the characters a lot better than I was kind of struggling with kind of a lot more of the plot elements with that game. And some of the story beats that resonated a lot more with me with the music in this game, I just thought was done incredibly well. I was so impressed.
Yeah, it's a more grounded story, but still trades in so much nuance and subtlety in terms of what characters are going through. And kind of alongside the music, there's like moments of visual things that happen. Like there's a moment where she first meets Shans in the house, and they're like basically Colum and Jack, who are kind of, so Colum is the person who she's known since she was younger, and so his boyfriend Jack is there, and so they kind of all live in this house, but then those two kind of go off on their own, and they're in this band with a person called Shans as well, and so she's kind of left there sitting with him, and the screen just has a bunch of words just saying awkward silence, awkward silence, awkward silence, and it's just like overcrossing each other, and you just see like the silhouettes of them in front of the TV, and like, man, that just like evokes a lot of like real moments that I think anyone has had in their life, right?
Yeah.
Of like, I've been in that moment. And it's just such a great distillation visually of things like that. And then later on, when things are all going wrong, like the similar thing of just the word or the sentence "everything's okay" is just plastered, and just keeps, and as you keep like rubbing it away, it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, it's just a really good visual representation of these thoughts that they're not often visually represented in media. Like, yes. I think a lot of film and TV like will have these feelings, but I don't think they ever visually convey them in such an artistic way that this game really this game goes for that in such a big way that makes it so impressive and unique.
Yeah, it visualizes those anxieties like so clearly, in a way other mediums can't, and like in a way that
they don't try to either.
Right, and by you trying to fix it almost as the player of like being like, okay, everything's okay, yes, I'm keep rubbing it just gets worse and worse and worse and keeps like plastering on and on the screen, and yeah, it just kind of spirals. I thought
it was really cool where you were right. There's so many points in the game where the more you rub, the more complicated it gets and more cluttered. Mm-hmm. And then at other points, the more you rub, the more clarity appears and everything becomes smoothed over, as it were. And there's multiple times in the game where, your action of doing that is making things either worse or better, as it were.
For sure, yeah. And there's a really great moment I like when she goes home and things have not been good, and she's coming back for like Christmas dinner, and there's this kind of zoomed out shot of like they're all at the table together, but it shows them like all really far apart on the table. This kind of moment of she's at home with them, but really she's like a million miles away, and I think that's a really clever kind of way to show those types of things. It also has this kind of space story that goes between it that I think I interpreted as almost her own internalized kind of narrative that's happening alongside what she's going through, that I didn't fully understand like what that was meant to be or what it was kind of related to. But
I didn't get a lot of it in the moment. I looked up some stuff afterwards, and it's basically like these two space travelers, as it were, that identify.
I mean, one of them's called Cassiopeia, which seems like a extended version of her name. Right?
Yeah. So they're these two space travelers, and they identify black holes in the universe and try and neutralize them in some way, basically. And they had identified a black hole in the west of Ireland at this point in time, and they were like chasing that, as it were. Right. So it was like Cassio almost like represents the situation she's in as this kind of black hole, and essentially needs saving by these space travelers to some degree. So I could have taken or left that kind of aspect of the game. Right, it was quite hard for me to kind of identify what it was going for and where it led to.
Yeah, I was kind of trying to like understand how it was going to fit in all the way through, and it was an interesting.
But I think the character relationships between Cassio and her brother and her mom, I think, were done very well, and I also think her relationship with Shan is super interesting and
very real, right? Like all of us have parents who don't understand things about us, right? Like every child has that experience, but like this is a much harder reality, right? That I'm sure a lot of trans people go through. That is like, just I am me, right? Just accept me for who I am. And the fact that they can't do that it's a really, like, they evoke it really well. And it's really, really well done. So yeah, I highly recommend people check this out. It's only a couple of hours long. Really visually and like audio. Does such a cool job of kind of showing all that stuff.
Another Annapurna game. A really great one, and it does that same thing where it marks chapters when you pause by like these dots, which is identical to the Artful Escape from last year. And I'm sure there's other story-driven Annapurna games that do it, but it just gives you good context for kind of how far along you are in the story or not, which I quite like a chapter in the book. Like, it's nice.
And they're like chapter breaks that you can go back to and re-experience if you wanted to as well, to see certain parts.
And there's some nice post-game stuff that I enjoyed, that kind of just tells you like where the characters are now and how everything played out, which I really appreciate.
Puts a nice bow on it, and I think, ends in a good way, and has some really, really cool stuff going on. So if found, check it out. The Switch version I would recommend, actually, because I think that touchscreen stuff is really good. There's an intimacy to kind of like being close to the screen when you're playing it.
It's very nice just playing this in bed before going to sleep, like just a few nights in a row. It's very, very nice, one of those.
Excellent. Cool. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is like the hardest left turn we'll take is Final Fantasy 1 on GBA. A pixel art, obviously RPG, the original Final Fantasy. Bally, as I mentioned many times on the show, my quest is to finish every Final Fantasy and every Dragon Quest, every mainline one anyway, that I can, that is feasible, let's say. It means that I'm probably not going to play Final Fantasy 11 because that's a very old MMO and not many people play it anymore, and it'll probably get shut down at some point. Same with Dragon Quest 10, which is a Japanese-only MMO that has never been released in the West yet, even though they're making an offline version of it and are not releasing that in the West either. So thanks, Square Enix. Really good decisions.
Oh, that's definitely going to appear in some direct randomly in like 4 years' time.
I hope so.
Like Live, it's coming.
Exactly.
It's coming.
Yeah, it will. But yeah, aside from that, I would like to play through all of them. And I have attempted in the past to play through the first Final Fantasy on GBA, but always was like, okay, I tried streaming it for a while, and I was like, well, this is really boring because all I'm doing is run around and killing enemies, and there's not a lot else going on. And like, that kind of is what this game is. It's very grindy heavy, and you are obviously going around different locations and fighting enemies and using your party and stuff like that. The game starts off more complicated than the original Dragon Quest, because the Dragon Quest 1, you're just one character going around the world. You don't have party members or anything. This, you start off and it's like, okay, pick your party members off the bat. So it was like, okay, I'm going to take a warrior, I'm going to take a monk, I'm going to take a white mage for healing, and I'm going to take a red mage to do damage, but also who can heal. So it's kind of this balance between them. And I named them all after Stormlight Archive characters. So I called my warrior Cal, my monk was Zeth, Yasna was my white mage, and Shallan was my red mage. So that's kind of my ode to Sanderson and those characters. I thought that'd be a fun way to do it, especially because you just can give them random names or whatever. So I was like, what's a good kind of crew of people for a fantasy game? I know, I'm going to steal from fantasy literature, and that's going to be a fun thing to do. So that's a fun way to like add a little connection to the characters, even though they are all completely silent and blank slates, and there's not really any like real dialogue between them or anything to speak of, aside from, when you go to towns and talk to NPCs and that type of stuff. But I think the really interesting part about the original Final Fantasy, or what I should say, the GBA version is a great way to play this, because for me personally, having grown up with GBA games, I just love the art of that pixel art style. There's something about it that is separate to Super Nintendo that is so unique and really nice. And
so they like remastered it a bit. It's not like a port, as it were.
It's fully, like, all the visuals are fully done up, because if you look at the NES version, my god, it's an ugly looking duckling, right? Like, it's an old ass game, very, very, very classic in its style. That said, the entire game is pretty much identical in terms of the map design, in terms of the layout and where items are and all that stuff.
Back in the day when Square Enix actually redesigned these games a bit more ground up than just kind of porting them to mobile.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was, I mean, the mobile ports have all that stuff, but the problem is the mobile ports are just fucking ugly. That's the problem. They're just really ugly.
They remastered an ugly game. Okay.
Yeah, they made it. I think the mobile port actually probably looks fucking worse than the NES games. They look so ugly. Oh my god, I cannot stand them. You should look up screenshots of those. They're real bad. But the GBA game, fucking gorgeous. Absolutely love like the overworld and the sprites, the characters, but it's really the bosses. Like, I think I tweeted multiple pictures of multiple bosses in this game. It's just like what you can do with pixel art, if you really take time with it, is just incredible. So that was a lot of fun, just seeing those designs as you go through. And the game, I think, generally is quite easy because you are constantly coming into enemies, and so you're constantly having to fight them, and so the grind is just natural. You will level up a ton, and you won't really have to worry about it, because every dungeon you go into, by the time you're done with it, you come out the other side, you're like, Jesus, I've leveled up like 12 times, and I have like infinite gold to buy everything. And it's really interesting how magic works in this game, where your characters don't learn it. You buy it from shops, and you have 3 slots per level. So level 1 magic, there will be 4 spells for white magic and 4 spells for black magic. White magic being curing and healing and like curing poison and that type of stuff, and black magic being your traditional like Firaga, Thundaga, that sort of stuff, and haste and like slow and all those types of spells. So every shop you go to, magic is very expensive, but you buy it with your gold, and then you kind of slot it into your characters. So the white mage and the red mage that I had a combination of those spells, and usually you have to leave one off the board. So you have 3 slots but 4 options, so there's usually one that you leave, and you can swap them out and switch if you want to, but generally I kind of chose the best ones and went with those for most of the game. And it's an interesting kind of thing, because you have a magic level that scales with your actual level, and so sometimes you won't be powerful enough to get them. I got to a bunch of towns where I couldn't use any of those spells, and that's because I hadn't upgraded my class yet. There's a class change moment in this game, kind of like in Fire Emblem, where you go to this big dragon, and the dragon's like, you need to do this trial for me, and so you go and do this trial underground, and it's this whole thing, and then you come back to him, and he basically upgrades all your classes, and then you're like, great, now I can go around the world and buy all those spells that I was missing, which is a really satisfying moment. The world itself there's far less like identifiers of actual Final Fantasy here. It feels a lot more like they're drawing on classical fantasy elements, where you don't have like Moogles or Chocobos or any of these kind of stalwarts of the series. Instead, you have the elves, and there's a town of elves, and there's dwarves and an underground village of dwarves. There are the dragons, and they're just a bunch of dragons walking around the place. There are the sky people who used to live in the air, and they had like sky ships and stuff. And obviously you get an airship in this game, and you have the boat and all that sort of stuff. Those are probably the biggest identifiers of like a traditional Final Fantasy game, is like the overworld exploration with having a boat that you get, and you can go to different continents, and then getting the airship from every single Final Fantasy game. I believe you get one, and this game has it as well. But yeah, all these just different races of traditional kind of fantasy tropes almost. It's really interesting, because Final Fantasy obviously began life as a RPG that was, probably a lot of like emulating a lot of what Dragon Quest was doing, because that was the first, but also drawing on Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like a lot of these first RPGs are drawing on Dungeons and Dragons and Tolkien and all those sorts of elements, because that's what traditional fantasy was. And it's really interesting to see that that's very clear in this first game, where you have all of these races that you don't really ever see in Final... Like, there aren't dwarves in other Final Fantasy games, right? Like, it's just not a thing. They usually have, like, their own races, or they made the Lalafell, I think they're called. The Lalafell, who are, like, these short characters who are in Final Fantasy 14, and you can play as one if you want to in that game. But those unique to the series species are just nowhere to be found here, which I just found really interesting as an idea of... They kind of had to start from somewhere, and they started drawing from these other influences. And yeah, so the game is, I think it's almost like Link's Awakening's trading quest, where you are going around and like, okay, I need you to go get this thing, so then you can go there, and this will let you through to this other area, and you're slowly opening up parts of the world and figuring out what towns to go to. Yeah, you have to use a guide for this game, honestly. Like, it's impossible to play it otherwise. I was having like a whole like dungeon map thing up in front of me, because you can get this is kind of era where dungeon design was basically, okay, let's make a bunch of fuck you areas, and then there's the actual path to go down. And in the fuck you areas, we're going to put a bunch of stuff like, there was one section in a dungeon where I was going through this corridor, and every 2 steps I took, it would automatically spawn some really hard enemies. And this section was going on for ages. I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm just going to die here, because every time I move, new enemies spawn and will attack me. And as soon soon as I got out of it, I was like, okay, the enemy spawns had stopped and like random battles were far less frequent. So it was clearly designed to be a little fuck you area for the player. If you accidentally go left instead of right, that's what's going to happen to you, and you're going to circle back round to where you started. And it's like, god damn it. It's really annoying in some senses, but because you are so high leveled and you have so much kind of MP for your characters, you can heal as often as you need to, and you can like stock up on items because you've got so much gold. So it was really actually, though I was never really in danger of dying in a dungeon, and when I got to bosses, sometimes I would kill them in a couple of turns and be like, that was it. That was the boss. I just fucking rolled all over that thing. So that was a really interesting thing, especially given how hard I think the NES version was and how like specific things you needed to get, and leveling up your armor and weapons and making sure you got the best equipment, which I did. I ended up getting all the best equipment and armor and all that stuff, and following the guide I think was a fun way to do it. But the other thing that's really important to note is that this game is slow. It is notoriously very, very slow to move around, to do battles. It's just a snail's pace. And the nice thing about modern Final Fantasy remakes is stuff like Final Fantasy 12 or 9 or 7 that they've put out on Switch. There's a toggle for fast forward, so you can just fast forward a bunch of those games to get through random encounters. Here's the nice thing about doing it on an emulation handheld, which I'm playing on my Ambernic, and it's a great time. I got through this game by playing on my commute. I'm only going in twice a week at the moment, but I've got a train morning and evening, and there's a good like half an hour slot that I get to where I can just play something, and it's been great for that because I'm playing it handheld on the tube, but also there's a fast forward option. So I played the entire game fast forwarded basically, and your character moves
fast forward rather than like double speed, or
it's basically double speed. Okay. Yeah. So
Nintendo have done this for their own RPGs.
Have they?
When you play Pokemon on the Pokemon Player on both Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2, you can play those games in either Duo speed or Dodrio speed.
No way, I never knew that.
Yeah, I think both Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 have it. And yeah, you can play red, blue, yellow, gold, silver, crystal at either double speed or triple speed.
Holy shit, Nintendo innovating all the way back then. That's crazy.
It is possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just using the double fast forward thing built into the emulator, so that's like it's a feature of RetroArch. It's not really a part of the game because this was a GBA game, so they didn't back then. They hadn't thought of the fact that this is going to be boring for a lot of people in a modern era playing an RPG because it takes too long.
So there was no fast forward feature in the GBA remake.
No, there's no native feature. Yeah. This is just me using RetroArch to double the speed of the game, essentially. And it is a great way to play it. Holy shit, it's a fantastic way to play it. It feels so much like faster to get through dungeons and to traverse the overworld and to explore places. It just makes it a much more fun experience, and it almost like you get used to it, to the fact that it feels like playing in slow motion when you turn it off, because it's like, oh no, this is the speed the game should run at. So I recommend, if you're going back to classic RPGs like this, just turn on the fast forward. It's going to save you so much time, and it's going to make the experience a lot more fun and enjoyable. And I had honestly a great time playing this. Like, I know it is like very classic and grindy and has a lot of obscurity to it, and like you'll never know where to go. You'll have to look up a guide to be like, okay, so I got this fairy bottle. Okay, I need to go to this random village, visit a lake. It will pop out and it will give me an item called Oxyale, which I have to remember. There was another town where there was a lady who was asking for Oxyale, which will then allow you to go into a submarine that lets you visit the mermaid palace underwater. Yeah, it's one of those, right? Like,
it's the kind of game I would write a physical note every time someone said, I'm looking for this thing, and then I'd write who they are, where they are.
I'm sure that's what people did back in the day as well. That's how the games were. But we're in 2022. I'm beyond that shit, and I'm just gonna go to the internet for it. So
see, I'm playing Horizon Forbidden West, and like this person will be like, I need this thing, and you're like, I don't have that like squirrel bone, and then you just press a button and it automatically becomes a job in your quests, and it'll just splat onto the map all these places you can get a squirrel bone, and you can so like just games, huh?
Yeah, games. They changed.
They changed
drastically. But in some ways others haven't. Like Elden Ring is basically Final Fantasy 1, isn't it? It's like not going to tell you shit. You just figure it out yourself.
Yes. You run around the world defeating baddies. Yeah,
that's right.
Same game.
It's pretty much the same game. Final Fantasy 1 and Elden Ring, makes sense. So, yeah, no, I had a really good time with it. Honestly, I think part of it is playing on a commute. Like, I don't need to listen to the battle music infinite times. So I've got podcasts playing while I'm playing it. And I think this is like this handheld, honestly, is revolutionizing the way I'm playing video games. I am digging into so much more classic stuff now because it's such an easy pick up and play, save state wherever you... That's the other thing. I can just save state before bosses, save state in the middle of dungeons, have multiple save states if I want, rewind, like all this stuff is just such a streamlined modern way to play classic RPGs. And I'll probably be diving into the second Final Fantasy and the Dawn of Souls collection at some point in the future, sometime this year, I'm sure. So yeah, fantastic stuff. Really loved it. Mario Kart 8, Bally. We bought it. Holy shit.
Not just Mario Kart 8. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. We've purchased it on Switch. I've jumped in a big way with Caroline. We're playing a good 2 or 4 GPs every single day at the moment.
Nice.
Just getting back in. Caroline's we already played a bunch on Wii U, so this is just us enjoying the luxury of playing Mario Kart on Switch. And yeah, not much has changed. Obviously, there's lots of battle mode that we've not even tried yet, and I'm gradually warming up Caroline to 200 cc's, but we're getting our way through 150 cc's at the moment, and it's just such a great game. I'm really excited for these new waves of tracks to come March 16th, March 20th, I think it is. So
something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm very excited. March 18th, apparently, is the first wave. So yeah, I think it's just a very, very good Mario Kart game, and it's just a really nice casual multiplayer game that we check into.
Yeah, how long did it take you to realize auto steer is turned on by default in this game? Because
I was like, these controls feel weird. What is going on? And I realized there's this light that was turning on, and I googled it, and it was like, oh, this is the auto steer. Yeah, so I had to go in there. You press the L button, turn it off.
So annoying. They just have it on by default. I was like, what's going on? Why does this feel strange?
You got three options. You got auto steer. You've got the ability that you always accelerate without pressing a button, and I can't remember what the third one is. Can you remember?
No, there are a few. Just it's some nice accessibility options, I guess. It's just I would have preferred it if they kept them off to begin with. But I think for them, from their perspective of so many kids are going to be getting Mario Kart day one on Switch, and whenever they get a Switch, right, if they're at Christmas and it's the first game they get, it makes sense for them without the help of their parents to be able to play it and enjoy it without falling off the course, right? And I think that's Nintendo's approach with why they turn that on straight away. Makes sense in some sense.
The thing about Mario Kart 8 is it's always had very quick revives when you've fallen off the course.
Yeah, so much more smooth than other Mario Kart games.
If you play Double Dash or 64, it takes ages to be respawned back on the track.
You are screwed, basically, if you fall off a track and you're doing 150 cc's. You're just going to lose that race, basically. You're not going to get into first if that happens to you.
But they're already holding your hand. For the real Mario Kart hardcore have played.
My biggest complaint, I've played a couple of GPs, just opened it, downloaded it, jumped in. I was like, all right, let's unlock a little bit of stuff and play. My biggest complaint is playing in handheld mode. I feel like it's very cramped holding A to accelerate constantly and then using the shoulder button to drift. There's something about it with the way it works with my hands. It just feels like my finger kept coming off of A. Oh God, I have to press this the whole time. I don't like actually playing it in handheld mode that much, despite the fact that it looks fucking gorgeous in handheld. Holy shit.
If you try pressing the A button with the squishy bit of flesh underneath your nail, rather than on the joint of your thumb, that should work. That should do the trick.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's real good advice. I did try that and it didn't help, FYI. So no, there's not really a way for it to work. I would prefer to play this, I think, most of the time with a Pro controller.
Yeah, that's how I've been playing. Yeah.
But yeah, it looks really... I can only imagine how good this looks on the Switch OLED. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Because this game, it's old, but my God, does it hold up visually. It is so beautiful.
Some really pretty nice locations. Here's one complaint I do have about Mario Kart tracks is with games like Sunshine and Odyssey and 64, I want more tracks that are based on in-game locations. You get a few of them here and there, but I'd like it a little more consistently, I think it's fun to have those actual video game locations in these tracks themselves. And I know that we're getting a bunch of DLC tracks, but not getting any brand new tracks, as it were. But that's something I'd love to see in the next Mario Kart, like some actual real world in terms of video game locations, because we get some of them here and there. You got Delfino Square, which was on the DS one originally. I think it got remade on Wii. I'd love to see more stuff like that.
It would be nice, I think, especially if we're having the whole crossover element going to be a factor potentially. Then, you can go to loads of different places. What if Simon Belmont shows up and you're going through Dracula's castle, right? Like shit like that could be awesome.
Exactly. That's the dream, I think, is that if they do properly open it up to loads of Nintendo franchises, not just Splatoon, a little bit of F-Zero and Villagers, then yeah, in-game location. Like that's what's so great about like the Hyrule Castle track and the Animal Crossing track. Like these are actual in-game locations. Like it just gives it a whole lot more like warmth and connectivity with the world. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. So hopefully Mario Kart 9 will do that in 19 years.
Are you looking forward to Coconut Mall?
Yeah, I love Coconut Mall. I'm not a hater like you, Bally.
Coconut Mall is the track that when people were still unlocking the tracks originally in Mario Kart 8, and rather than unlock the tracks, they just go and play the online.
Mario Kart Wii, you mean?
Pardon?
Mario Kart Wii. You said Mario Kart 8. But
no, you're right. Mario Kart Wii, because that's when Coconut Mall was first there.
Yes.
And people would just always pick Coconut Mall because they hadn't unlocked the later tracks, and the number of times people would pick that damn track and be like, yeah, Coconut Mall is so great, and I just hate it. I'm
because you played so much Mario Kart Online, and you were just
I played so much. They even had like weekly missions in that game.
Yeah, remember those?
Which is so awesome. Like I love Mario Kart 8. It's a very plain set of menus. It's very plain.
Yeah, that's what I will say. As soon as I booted it up, I'm like, man, this is a bit of a disappointing game, isn't it? When you look at it, like, okay, let's just do some GPs and then go online, I guess. There's nothing else to do in that game. And look, it's the best fucking selling game, but
you can do versus mode where you can like shuffle the tracks and do 18, 16, 32 track GPs, and then you can shuffle tracks, adjust the computer difficulty and stuff. But it's like, yeah, give us that mission mode.
Yeah, look, it's not like Nintendo needs to change anything. They sold 40 fucking million copies of it.
That's why we're getting 6 DLC packs of old tracks. But I'm here for them. I'm excited. I think it's still going to be great.
They got us, Bally. Fucking 7, 8 years later, they did
got us.
So, what are you going to do? Cool. Well, that is the video games, what we've been playing. A lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff, enjoyable. And we'll be back after the break to chat about some of your emails. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the second part of today's show. It's time for your emails. We put out the call and everyone listened. We got some emails in and that's fantastic. But we always need more. We always say this. So if you would like to send an email to the show, please email ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Alternatively, you can join our Discord. A link to that in the description of the show. Our first email is from Wade, who is from Brisbane, Australia. And they say, "Hi guys, I'm in urgent need of some parenting advice and cannot think of anyone more qualified to help than a pair of childless Nintendo geeks.
Yep, we're the experts here on this subject.
My 4-year-old son has started to play video games and he has had a blast with Mario Kart 8 and Donut County, to name a few. He especially loves co-op games where he can unlock loads of new characters and there's no real penalty for dying, i.e. Lego games. The various Star Wars, Marvel and DC Lego games have been absolutely played to death in our household, and it has been a lot of fun. Which brings me to my problem. The early Lego games have very little camera control and are primarily played from a pulled out side view perspective. However, the next generation of games moved to a pseudo open world model, e.g. Lego Batman 2 and Lego Marvel Superheroes. My son has no problems using dual analog sticks to control character and camera movement, but Gamer Dad here is screwed because these two games do not have an option to invert the controls. I have played inverted my entire life and couldn't change if I wanted to. We recently started playing Lego Marvel Superheroes 2, and to my delight, it does have an invert option. So my question to you is this. Do I mold my son's gaming habits in my image and turn on inverted controls for him so we can enjoy a lifetime of stress-free couch co-op gaming? Or do I let him discover his preference by himself and no doubt go with the default non-inverted option? Of course, he will have complete freedom to choose less important things, such as religion, but I need to get this gaming situation sorted. I cannot remember if either of you are members of Invert Nation and look forward to your feedback. Cheers, Wade.
Well, Wade, this is a scenario, it's a situation that needs to be resolved. Very important, very, very stressful, of course. Invert, non-invert. Bally, I don't know that I've had to think about this that much in the past, because for the most part, if you're not inverted, which I believe I am not inverted, games will cater to you, which means they will just out the box work in a way that makes sense with camera control and with aiming guns and with all that other stuff. The most that I get involved in inverted stuff is in games where you have to fly something like a plane or some kind of airborne vehicle, where naturally you want to move the stick down to go up and up to go down, like the yi and yaw, is that what they call it? I can't remember. In terms of moving stuff in the air, and that's kind of where I come down on inverted controls. Bally, have you had many run-ins with using inverted controls, or do you think sometimes like you'll start a game and it'll feel off and you'll try and mess around? That sometimes happens to me, of like starting a game, feels a bit off, mess around with it, and then sometimes I get to a point where I kind of actually don't know which one I wanted, or, you know.
I think I agree with you on like flying games like Rogue Squadron and that, like it just feels natural where it is inverted. I think the camera for a lot of games kind of back in the kind of Mario Sunshine early noughties era, I think it was quite a mixture of inverted and non-inverted, and
yes, and there's often no options back then to change it, right? The remaster of Sunshine as part of the collection, which you can no longer buy, thanks Nintendo, was the first time you were able to actually have Mario Sunshine with different analog stick implementation, because the option didn't exist back in the day. It's very much what Nintendo does, which is they just don't give you options. They just tell you this is how the game's going to be played, and you better come to like it. And so, I think at that time, probably neither of us really realized it. We just probably thought, oh, this is really hard to control.
Well, yeah, and as you say, growing up as a Nintendo gamer, you don't have a choice. So you like it or lump it, really. And as a result, my preference is I don't have a preference. I just do what the game tells me to do. And I'm okay with that. I think that, sure, there might be more flexibility in many games now to invert the camera controls, but is it really bad for me to say, like, is this really a big option? Is this really a big deal? I know that a lot of people feel strongly about this, but it's kind of like, you know, we used to use Imperial, now we use Metric, and the world's moved on, and you just kind of go with the flow. And
see, I think that sort of thing is more easy to, not necessarily more easy, but you can get your head around like changing systems when it comes to stuff like numbers and things like that. When it's an actual physical input, there is something to do with muscle memory and like the way that your brain connects with the movement of your fingers that I think is intrinsically tied to like the way you've been introduced to that stuff, or the way in which you understand how things work, right? When it comes to camera control, it does feel weird to me if I expect it to move one way and then I move it and it does the opposite, right? Like it's just a jarring experience. And so I do think that that's something that's really hard to get your head around once you have been embedded in it, right? Like
I guess I've never been embedded, and I agree with you. If you move it one way and the camera goes another, it's strange, but I find it strange for all of 2 minutes, and then I'm in that zone. I get used to it. I just I move on.
That's weird. Maybe you have the kind of like ambidextrous nature of inverted.
But that's thanks to Nintendo, like I said, because they kind of mixed it up when I was younger, and it just kind of I would argue two games that came out at very similar times that, in my view, to my memory, have the opposite camera controls, and the third person are Mario Sunshine and Wind Waker. I'm pretty sure they have opposite inverted. Now, I think Mario Sunshine's inverted and Wind Waker's not, but
yes,
feel free to write in and correct me, but I'm pretty sure those two are the opposite, and I think they came out like a year apart or the same year, like 01, 02. So
yeah.
Maybe it's because of that, and I'm being very arrogant because that's what I grew up doing.
Bally can do anything, throw any camera stick at him.
But on top of that, I was playing Rogue Squadron, which was another GameCube like launch game, like in and around that time. So maybe that's just what I'm used to. But I don't know. I think as video game players, I think that and gamers generally are very good to adapting to new systems, because that's what we're constantly asked to do with new games. Now, lots of games are inspired by previous games, and sure, we're in these zones where new driving games come out and new open world games come out, and they basically have the same DNA with very small tweaks here and there. But every now and then, like, games are changing. Like between now and 20 years ago, games are completely different in so many ways, and I think gamers generally, I think the modern gamer is very used to adapting to new systems, and I think this idea of inverted and non-inverted camera controls is a very archaic way of looking at the medium, when in reality we're changing new systems, learning new mechanics, learning new ways that cameras and players are interacting with the character on screen, that I feel like it's a very small issue.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people feel the opposite way, which is where we get to this question.
But are any of those people younger than us, is what I'd ask.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? When you think about like younger people growing up on iPads and stuff, like how does camera control work in those games? It's often much more tactile and like moving it towards where you are and where you want it to be. Like, I don't know how that works, because that feels a bit more intuitive in terms of like your finger is literally moving it around.
Are you saying that there are people right now who are 20 years old who have a podcast and they are saying, God, I've got this old uncle and he refuses to use digital analog sticks. Can you believe it? He insists that analog sticks have to be real 3-dimensional pieces of plastic in a games controller. Can you believe? And maybe that's the Bally on their show, you know, that's saying people need to move on with the times, but
sort it out, man.
Right. So maybe I'm in the wrong on that one, but you see what I mean.
I know what you mean. It's also really weird, just as we were mentioning, like there are different ways in which I view control from an inversion perspective depending on the mode of play I'm in. So like, as I said, flying a plane is often different because I tip down to go up and up to go down, but left and right remains usually the same. Whereas in a camera situation, I think it's pretty much the same. Like when you're looking towards the ground using a third person camera, I will tip the stick up naturally to like look down, and tip it down to look up, and then if I turn to the left it will kind of swing around to that side and vice versa. So there's also the deal of like, are you up down inverted or left right inverted? Because up down inverted I think is much more common in terms of certain types of play, versus left right. If left right inverted is a thing, then that I think would fuck up my brain completely, because that feels the opposite of how I understand
I'm pretty sure there's some games I've played where they do have an option for like left right inverted.
Yeah, they usually do. Yeah. They usually have it kind of like broken down in specific options. But then you talk about like aiming a gun, and like if people play that way inverted, that completely messes with me, because with a gun I want to be aiming like exactly where my analog stick is pointing. So if I want to shoot someone above, I want to move my stick upwards to aim upwards, and downwards and left and all of that, right? So it has to be like directly analogous. Whereas if someone inverted was playing with that, they would be doing the opposite and almost treating the gun like it was a plane, if you know what I mean, like tipping it forwards to go down and up to go and down to go up. It's really mind-boggling for my brain to get around that, and yet it's so natural to switch between the inverted version in camera controls versus the non-inverted in gun controls. But our brain does it, right? Our brain just kind of naturally reacts.
I'm all about this discussion in 10 years' time, when we won't even be having this discussion, because the camera will move based on the part of the screen that our eyeballs are looking. And,
of course, yeah.
And you will be moving the character with the left analog stick, but the right analog stick won't be used for anything camera related, because that's done using your eyes. So,
yeah.
Say you're playing like, I don't know, Mario Odyssey and you want to see what's to the right of Mario off screen, if your eyes look to the right of the screen, the camera will naturally pan right rather than you moving it around on the analog stick, meaning that you can focus on the movement. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think Sony are kind of implementing that in their next VR system, right? Like they're kind of doing eye tracking, and eye tracking has actually been something they've been messing with for a while. I think a few years ago at E3, people were talking about like a demo of Spider-Man where they had eye tracking implemented into it just on a TV, and people were able to just like use their eyes to move where the perspective was, right? And it's or like highlight things or things like that, like having blink controls or eye controls, like God, what's
Before
the game
Your
from
Eyes.
last year? Before Your Eyes, yeah. And
Very cool.
That whole idea is very unique from a gameplay perspective, and you can do a lot of things with it. But here's the thing, Wade. Now, here's what you got to do. You have to buy a Wii. The Wii famously uses one analog stick on the nunchuck and doesn't have a second analog stick on the Wii remote. And, you know, during that era, Bally and I would have played a lot of games and not had to worry about camera control at all. And if you're talking about couch co-op games, look, the Wii has a lot of couch co-op games. So if you want to avoid this problem entirely, buy a Wii, play those games with your kid, and that's how you get around this issue of inverted camera controls, because you have none. There are no camera controls. Yeah, get rid of it. Like, because playing stuff like Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword on Wii, the way you sort out the camera in that game is just using the back button. I think it was B or maybe it was Z on the nunchuck.
I think it was the C button, wasn't it? On the
I guess it was C button on the nunchuck,
yes.
right? Where it would just reorient the camera right behind where Link was at any given time. And so like getting around places was just constantly pressing that button to keep it behind him so that you could change the point of view, which, yes, it's very clunky and probably not ideal, but that was kind of how we played games back then, and I was fine with it. You know, I dealt with it. So
it was weirdly a step backwards in many ways, considering my example earlier of Mario Sunshine and Wind Waker having the C stick, which did control the camera, which is kind of wild.
Nintendo were like starting to get into camera controls, and then all of a sudden they made a system that didn't have them. Unless of course you were using the classic controller, which did have one. And like I think Xenoblade's one of the rare games where I played it all with the classic controller and had a second stick.
Very rare game that did that, though, wasn't it?
It was. It wasn't that common generally when it came to those types of games. But,
should Wade subject his son to torture and insist on inverted camera controls?
So let's come to a story, Bally, that I have about my childhood, my sister's childhood, and something that is similar to this, I think, which is which hand do you write with, Bally? You know, that's a question as a kid of like, you know, are you right-handed, are you left-handed, and as a parent, what decision do you make about that? So my sister grew up, generally speaking, using her left hand when she's writing. So that's the natural thing she went towards. You know, if you just gave her a pencil, she'd pick up with her left hand, start writing with her left hand. My mum thought, left hand, interesting. That's going to be a hard life for you because most things are built for right-handed people. Left-handed people do not get catered to a lot of the time, and oftentimes it's just a little annoying if you're a left-handed person, because most of the world is right-handed. It's a small percentage who are left-handed, and so it's just going to be easier in life if you're right-handed. So what my mom did is she forced my sister to write with her right hand and didn't let her use her left hand and said, you're just going to use your right hand. This is all you're going to do. This is going to be your life. And she adapted to it. She did. So she basically forced herself to learn with her right hand, and now she is right-handed. So, I mean, I don't know. Would I say it worked out? I don't know. I don't know if that's the right thing to do.
Whoa. Is your sister right-handed across tennis
everything
and sports and picking up a golf club, or I don't know?
Generally, I think so. Actually, I do need to actually maybe pay more attention to that when we're playing like badminton or tennis or something.
Or if you kick a ball to each other, is she going off her right or left foot?
Yeah, I haven't actually paid enough attention to that, and I'm not sure if she has either. But yeah, I think probably if she had done more left-handed as well, she could have ended up being ambidextrous.
See, this is famously what Rafael Nadal's uncle, who's also his coach, did to him when he was a younger player. Only the opposite. So he insisted Nadal would learn to play left-handed to give him an advantage against the majority of men on tour who are right-handed.
Oh, wow.
Because in tennis, if you're left-handed, you're basically hitting forehand to their backhand, and if you can run around the ball like Nadal can, you can hit some pretty powerful cross-court short shots to their weak side, arguably. So it was just one of those things his uncle did from a very young age, was you're going to become a left-handed tennis player. And now, on top of this, I actually think Nadal has one of the more unorthodox techniques when it comes to tennis, especially if you compare him to a Djokovic or a Federer. Like, he's a very unorthodox player, and I swear it's because he's learned to play with his wrong hand, arguably.
That's really interesting.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But it worked out well for him, is my point. So maybe your mum was onto something.
Look, my sister, she's turned out fine. She can write with her right hand. It's all good. She uses her right hand. But I don't know. There's this world in which I'm like, well, wouldn't you be more unique? Wouldn't you be more interesting if you were left-handed instead? And this is the interesting part, because Wade is the interesting person who's inverted. And so it's like, does he try and turn his son to this thing that is less people will use? Will that cause issues when your son goes to their friends' houses and they play with non-inverted, and he's like, oh, I can't play multiplayer games with them, right? These are things you have to think about, of like generally affecting the rest of his life.
Just play Nintendo games, and then the choice is taken out of your hands and put in the firm hands of Nintendo,
the designer.
And you can never go wrong with Nintendo, as everyone has learned listening to this show.
Yeah, no, never. They're a perfect company with zero flaws and issues whatsoever. It is interesting generally, though, I would say, from a Nintendo perspective, of we didn't really grow up with that many games where you had to use camera controls, because it wasn't really the type of game Nintendo were focusing on.
Because the Wii was such a large part of our childhood, it was kind of just took it out of the question. And those two examples I gave on GameCube, like, we weren't playing a ton of other third-person action adventure games. Like, there weren't many that we
were playing Mario Party and Smash Brothers, where that stuff just isn't necessary.
Don't need camera for all that stuff. So
yeah. So yeah, I don't know. My general thought on kids and game stuff is let them do what they want. Generally, just like give it to them, let them figure it out, let them understand what they like and what they want. So that would be my approach, is like, give him the controller. If he chooses inverted, great, that's helpful for you, because then you don't have to worry about it. If he doesn't, then I think it's okay as well. And I think the other thing with gaming going forward, I think Wade mentions having a couch co-op experience that is stress-free. I think you can like manually change different players' inputs, I'm pretty sure, in a lot of modern games at this point, right? Maybe there aren't so much with the Batman or the Lego games when it comes to that stuff, but having the ability to be like, okay, well, my controller, my profile, if you're playing on Xbox and you both have profiles, then your controller can be set to inverted and your son's can be set to non-inverted, and then you don't have to worry about it because you're both doing your own thing on your own profile.
We're going in the right direction on that stuff generally, and then eventually, as I said, we'll get to eye tracking and we won't have to care.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's definitely an interesting thing to think about. So but whatever way you go, I'm sure it'll work out in the end. So
great.
Yeah.
Our next question is from Albert, who's from Austria. It says, Dear MVZ and Bally, I couldn't help but notice a bit of cynicism in your 2022 Nintendo predictions.
Cynical?
I can't believe it. With the 5th anniversary of the Switch's release coming up, I think we just had it, or is it coming up still? I think it's coming up.
It's coming up very soon.
I was wondering whether you feel like your initial expectations of the system and its library have been met. Personally, I must admit that the promise of having both handheld and console releases on one system would give us shorter release cycles for Nintendo's big franchises than what we've seen. The lack of proper access to their software catalog from past consoles is also disappointing, and to me hasn't helped bridge the gaps between blockbuster releases. Being a Wii U owner likely also adds to this overall disappointment, as I've played many of their ports during their initial release. Anyway, enough from me. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. All the best and keep it up. Albert.
Thanks, Albert. This is definitely something I think we've talked about over the years, of having been people who played Wii U and owned Wii U, and having played a lot of those games. When it comes to the kind of calendar of releases from Nintendo, a lot of games get recycled through because they were a failure on Wii U and therefore they want to be a success on Switch. And so when they're like, oh, Pikmin 3's out and Tropical Freeze's out and it's Rayman Legends has come back, and like all these things that we played years ago, Mario Kart 8 being the chief one among them, we decided, oh, well, I've already played that, so I'm not going to play it and I'm not going to worry about it. That said, I think that my initial expectations of the system and its library have probably actually been exceeded, in all honesty, because you have to know, like, coming into this system, coming off the back of Wii U, coming off like that entire like drought of software and like lack of support from third parties and even indies being like very minimal on the system, I think, you know, having gone through that January presentation, we were both pretty cynical coming out of that, you know, thinking, oh, this is going to be a repeat. It's just, we're not going to get anything interesting. They're just doing the same old Nintendo thing.
There's a big emphasis on ARMS and 1-2 Switch in that initial reveal as well.
Yeah, it felt like maybe they're backsliding into Wii era stuff again and like making those kind of decisions. And ultimately, we were proven wrong in terms of the actual stuff that they have put out, but also like what has been successful on the system. And the types of things that have been successful on the system have been games that they are more traditional from a Nintendo perspective, and therefore I think have encouraged them to go further down that route to cater to that audience who wants like just Nintendo stuff but handheld. And that, I think, has generally speaking worked out. But it's come in waves, you know, like the first year was a banger. It was ridiculous. There were so many great big games coming out, like one a month at least, and it was always like exciting and interesting. And you had a slow kind of build up of third party stuff with, you know, Bethesda supporting the system and stuff like that, and having the indies kind of get onto the eShop slowly but surely. And then it kind of like started to flood, like where every game started getting announced for Switch, and I started to lose track of like what was announced and what wasn't. And I was like, this is really weird. Like I usually pride myself on like knowing everything that comes out from a third party or a first party on a Nintendo platform, but like there were just so many ports and so many things coming to the system that it was like, oh shit, I didn't even realize that had been released on Switch or that it had been announced for Switch, because there's just an exorbitant amount at this point that people are putting on the system, from like random old games like Turok to like games from last generation to like they just announced fucking the Force Unleashed Wii version is coming out. Like there's, I think the Switch from a third party perspective has been such a nostalgia mine and such a kind of old game mine in terms of putting all of their stuff from previous platforms. Like you can get Taz the Tasmanian, or what's his name, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger,
Tiger
on, which was a GameCube game, and they just re-released that. Like, I think it was a THQ game, and THQ Nordic, or whatever the fuck they're called now, re-released it. And like, it's just so weird to have all those types of various games on the platform alongside Nintendo putting out their big things. And I think it has come in those waves of 2018 was like, okay, it's kind of just Smash Brothers and like let's go Pikachu and Eevee and like not much else. And then 2019 was like the back half of the year was just like Link's Awakening, bang, then Astral Chain, then another Pokemon
Luigi's
game.
Mansion
like,
3.
Luigi's Mansion 3. It was like back to back, like 6 months of the back half of that year that were just killer. And then 2020 happens and it's pandemic, and it's like, oh, okay, well, Paper Mario's coming out and not much. And then last year was like, okay, we have a few things and like Pokemon Snap here, Metroid Dread there, and I think it feels like Nintendo are ramping up for like a big year this year. And I wonder how much like the pandemic affected their momentum, because we did have an example of 2018 where it was a quieter year for them and there wasn't as much first party software coming out, but would that have continued to be the case, or would we have gone at a cadence of 1 year is a hot year, 1 year's a cold year? Because it felt like 2017 and 2019 were very hot in terms of lots of big releases and good stuff, and then the kind of years in between have been less so from that perspective, which is interesting when you consider they're not doing two systems anymore. They have this one umbrella under which they can put everything, but also because it's a console, game development takes longer because it's like a higher powered system and you don't have those smaller releases that you can consistently be putting out at a constant cadence. Maybe it is a little undershooting our expectations of what could be possible given their kind of consolidation of both 3DS and Wii U kind of development, you know.
I think on that final point that maybe one of the disappointments is that, as you say, there's not enough games that are maybe designed ground up for handheld. And I'm thinking more Part-Time UFO and these kind of games where you felt there were a few more of them on 3DS, and because the handheld only system is no longer, and this is a handheld console hybrid, I would love it if Nintendo just had a few more smaller teams that churned out those fun, shorter experiences that are more handheld focused on a more frequent basis, you know. I think that would be a great complement to Breath of the Wild 2 and the next Mario, 3D Mario, and these kinds of things. And I think sometimes they've maybe got that balance a little bit wrong, but at the same time, as you've said, the indie scene has just been so strong on Switch, with almost all of the big indies being day one on Switch, and often the timed exclusives on Switch, which, coming off the back of the Wii U, is a huge step up for Nintendo. And while they've got a bit of a mixed track record on the way that a lot of the third-party stuff runs, like the third-party AAA stuff, I should say, it's still really encouraging that all those companies are, putting stuff out on Switch at all, let alone like what was happening with Wii U. And then from a first-party perspective, you're right, 2017 just kind of blew the industry away, honestly. It's like for a single console, it must be one of the best years in video games ever. Like it's kind of hard to rival. And I know a lot of the sequels to those games are coming back now. But I think it's so hard to compare to the Wii U, because as much as we enjoyed the Wii U, I think people have a very short-term memory when it comes to like how long a lot of the waits were between the big games for Wii U. There was some times where it was just like our Game of the Year discussion was Star Fox Zero or Fire Emblem Fates, right? And those were like the two big games of the year for, I believe it was 2014, I want to say. It just maybe 2015, but it's just kind of like there are just so many more big games coming out from a first party perspective that I think the Switch has far surpassed my expectations. And that's not even talking about the fact that having a console handheld hybrid has just been a breath of fresh air when it comes to the way I play games, and playing a bit in bed, playing on the TV, doing both. Like, not having the ability to do both like that before makes you, we never want to go back to a scene where we have a handheld versus a console. Like, this idea that we have a Nintendo hybrid is absolutely perfect, and we just want a more powerful one of those. And the fact that we want a more powerful one of those, I think, speaks volumes to how much I think the Switch is just hugely successful in my book. And we don't maybe need to rehash a discussion on like Virtual Console and the lack of stuff on Switch, and they're incredibly slow now with the N64 and like the Switch Online system.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably going to talk about it in the next part of the show when we talk about the shops being closed down. But
exactly.
Yeah, and that sucks, of course.
It does suck, and that was arguably one of the best things about the Wii U, and especially kind of what we gained out of it for this show. So it's a shame the Switch doesn't have that, but on the bright side, like, I would have given my left arm back in the Wii U days to have the sheer quantity and quality of both first party output and indie output that we have on the Switch right now. It's something that might not be there forever for Nintendo fans, like these things come in waves, and we should be very grateful while we have it, because they're on a real steamroller right now. And as we know with Nintendo, they can put the brakes on quick when we don't want them to.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's definitely like pandemic stuff that has really affected their output in a lot of ways. Like, a lot of Japanese companies I think were affected, but I think Nintendo far more than most. Just the way that they work with secrecy and like not wanting developers to take dev kits home and that type of thing. Like, they have a lot of restrictions and a lot of issues around that, which made it so that their output over the last couple of years has been slightly lackluster. We've had great stuff, of course, but it's not been as big as you want it to be. So it feels like they are building up to this year being like, okay, now we're just going to put everything on the table, and it's going to just be a crazy, crazy big success. And that's hopefully going to be the case. But like, from the perspective of like the number of games that I own or have played on a console, Switch is the biggest by far. Like, the number of games that I have, from indies to big games to third-party stuff to ports, like, there's just an inordinate amount, and the only other platform I have that rivals it is the PC, right? My PC, of course, on Steam, I have like 500 fucking games, and like 600 probably if you add all the other random launches that I have. Like, it's stupid, but that's because like stuff is so cheap and you get stuff for free on PC all the time. Switch, I am buying all those games, a lot of them at full price, oftentimes on sale, but also like there's a lot. And like, I loaded up at the start of this year and end of last year in sales of like, I've got like 7-8 indie games lined up to play in the near future on Switch, and deliberately chosen the Switch versions because those are the ones where I know I'm going to enjoy them the most and have the best time doing it. And like, a great example of like If Found that we talked about in the first segment of the touchscreen for me being such an integral part to that experience, and you don't get that experience on another platform, or like the intimate closeness of having it on handheld that kind of story allows for. So I think that in a lot of ways it is the best place to play a lot of these types of games as well. So
I've got some fun stats. So
okay,
as you said, like number of games played. So I'm just on my backloggery. Maybe stick a link to this in the description. But
sure.
I track all the games that I've been playing. And unlike MBZ, I don't count any virtual console or retro games in my current number. The current number is only ever current games and remakes. But on Nintendo 3DS, I played 38 games. On Wii U, apparently I also played 38 games. And they're both my joint second. The Switch is number one. And I currently have logged 91 games that I've played. That's not beaten games. That's like games I own on the system. So I've beaten 72 games on Switch. I've beaten 27 games on 3DS. And then I've beaten 31 games on Wii U. So my point is, because everything is just funneled through the Switch, on top of the fact that the sheer quantity of content is huge. Like, you could put together the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U's kind of life cycle of first-party content on top of indie games, and the Switch is still beating it by a good 10-20 games over a similar period of time. Like, it's monstrous, like, the amount of stuff and quality stuff that is coming to that console. And from a Nintendo perspective, I don't think we've ever had it this good, like in our lives at least.
It's so good that like my fridge management is off the chain with Switch. Every time I download a new game, it's like, oh, gotta make space. I'm like, fuck, all right, gotta delete this, gotta delete that. I just need a bigger memory card. Like, I have too many things digitally. And for a time, Nintendo were allowing digital codes as well. So like I was getting those for all the big games, and so yeah, it was really crazy when it came to like the amount of software and stuff that I just have loaded onto that thing. And yeah, it's bursting at the seams. Like, I just don't have enough space. So I think that speaks to how successful it's been in our eyes. And yeah, look, we're always going to be cynical about the future of Nintendo, because who the fuck knows what they do. Like, we
know how quickly they can drop the ball, and we'll never forget that.
Yeah, they make wild, baffling decisions constantly. It is their MO, and frankly, it's the reason I love them the most. Like, it's why they are the most interesting company to follow in the games industry, by far, from my perspective. Because they just come out of nowhere with crazy shit. But at a base level, when it comes down to it, the system is it's really good, you know, like really? It works, it's fantastic, and I've had a great time with it.
We'd love a more powerful one when the chip shortage is less of an issue for them, but power aside, and that's only something that's become more of an issue in recent times. Genuinely, like, it's such a great system, and you know, 30 FPS can get me a few more years out of it, I guess.
Yeah. We'll see. It's all good.
Yeah, good question, Albert. Thank you very much for that one. That's all we got time for emails on this segment. Like I said at the top of the segment, always need more emails. The email address is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Also join our Discord server. Comment in there. That's all we've got time for this segment. Join us in the next segment. We're going to be talking about that very topic of the Wii U and 3DS eShops closing down. We will be right back.
All right, folks, welcome back to the third and final part of today's show. It's been a lot of news around Nintendo recently in not a good way, in a way that has made people annoyed and frustrated and sad, but ultimately resigned to the fate that we all live in, which is Nintendo's decision to discontinue the Wii U and 3DS eShops. Obviously, we have gone through this before, relatively recently, with the Wii. They closed down the Wii Shop channel a couple of years ago, and that caused a whole furore of people being like, well, these hundreds of Virtual Console games are just going to disappear, and you're never going to be able to access them again, as well as certain WiiWare games, like things like Fluidity and Lost Winds and all these other games that just disappear.
They also stopped accepting like credit cards on the 3DS and Wii U shop fairly recently, like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was something like you couldn't use actual cards on the system level. You would have to go to the website and then buy them via the website in order to pay for them using a card. Otherwise, you'd have to buy...
It was a bit of a faff when I picked up Paper Mario, for sure. It wasn't the easiest.
Exactly. I've gone through it. The biggest faff that it was the DLC for Phoenix Wright 5, where... the only way to buy that DLC is within the game itself. There's a menu inside the game to purchase it, but you cannot add currency via that menu, and there was no way for me to click on the DLC on the website to do it, so I had to add currency via the website, which was a stock amount of 10 quid that then I could use, because it was in my wallet, to buy the DLC for Phoenix Wright 5. I'm going to have to do that again for Phoenix Wright 6, because there's also DLC for that I haven't got yet. So I'm going to have to go through the rigmarole. But I'm sure I'll be loading up my wallet with a bunch of stuff anyway. We should also mention the online services, the obviously playing online games with people for DS and Wii was discontinued even earlier than that, because I was doing my last ever Pokemon Diamond and Pearl Wi-Fi matches right before that happened, just to make sure that I got some final games in before they closed down that online service. That happened quite a while ago, and that was all to do with, was it games? I can't remember. There was a company that IGN owned, who were the people that Nintendo were using for the Wii and DS online service, and when they shut down, that caused that entire service to go down as well. They have not said anything about the Wii U and 3DS online multiplayer. This is just the eShop so far, so I don't know what the situation would be like with multiplayer stuff, but for the moment, it's the eShop. So getting into the details, in May this year, so May 23rd, you will no longer be able to use credit cards to add funds to an account. So you won't even be able to do that on the website anymore. You will, however, probably be able to add it to your Switch wallet. And if you have a 3DS and Wii U account, as well as a Switch account, you should have a shared wallet for that. Although I don't know these days, if you buy a new 3DS and a new Wii U, whether you can do that whole connection or if it works backwards or not, because I only have experience with owning those systems and then moving my account forwards to Switch. I don't know if it works in reverse, but that's a whole thing for people to figure out. And then of August this year, August 29th, you'll no longer be able to use eShop cards to add funds anymore either. So you would, by that metric, then again have to go via Switch and use it through that way, which kind of gives you a little bit of a workaround, I guess. But I think for most people, it will be these are the cutoffs for like actually adding amounts of money to your wallet so that then you can do it. And then in late March of next year, it will completely shut down. It will still mean that you'll still be able to download stuff. So this is the thing I didn't understand about the Wii Shop. You can actually still go to the Wii Shop channel and download stuff if you had bought it previously. So if you deleted it off an SD card and you're like, oh, need to get Ocarina of Time again on Wii, you can still actually download that game. It will let you do that. For now. But it sounds like with this... that will probably be soon around the corner of them getting rid of the ability to do that for Wii and also for Wii U and 3DS, of just not having even access to download anymore. So if your system breaks and you lose all the stuff on it, you won't even be able to download it on a new system in the future either. So Bally, that said, this fucking sucks. It's really a terrible decision, and it comes so soon after these systems have kind of been in the marketplace. With the Wii, it was a pretty decent long time. Like, it was around the end of the Wii U life cycle, or a bit longer than that before they did. Probably it was into the Switch being out that the Wii was shut down. And this seems a lot quicker than that. Like, the 3DS and Wii U are far more modern systems and have been around a lot less longer for for this to be the case.
They are still 11 and 9 years old respectively.
Sure.
Which I agree. And I was just reading it like of some threads and other journalists and things writing about this, and someone was talking about just how it costs Nintendo a lot of money to kind of run these servers and to set up these shops. And
yes.
Especially
credit card payment services
and those
thing
services.
That's difficult because people can hack them, and it's a nightmare to keep it up to date, especially when they're so old. They don't have the people with the knowledge of how to keep running them anymore, basically.
But apart from that, it's incredibly hard to future-proof systems in a way that makes sense and is also cost efficient. Like the way that the Nintendo Switch eShop will be geared will be completely different to the Wii U and likewise the 3DS, and trying to think 10, 15 years in advance to make sure that those shops are viable and efficient. Like they're ultimately on servers in a location and everything deteriorates, and it's about how, from a commercial perspective, what makes the most sense to Nintendo. And this is where it does get frustrating, because we've said it before, Nintendo create products that we buy that make them money, but they are also in some aspect creating art, creating like pillars of culture that will exist and we will look back on in 50, 100, 200 years time and say, that is an important stake. Like Wii Sports is an important stake in our culture. Like
it is,
whether we like it or not. And I think, like we've talked about before with the Video Game History Foundation and the importance of like preserving video games, I think this is where the argument goes away from the commercialization. And I think it's a real shame that, yes, as consumers, we will not have access to these games, but I think it would be too hopeful for us to hope that we would always be able to access these games, because regardless of digital eShops, that's always been the case. Like you still can't buy N64 games and Super Nintendo games in the same way you could when they were first released. So that argument doesn't really change. It's when it's digital, we assume, oh, it's digital, therefore we should always have access, when in reality, it is still stored on physical media, physical hard drive space somewhere.
Yeah, because everything has to be, right?
Because everything has to be. And I think that's where I don't really believe it's on Nintendo to keep these games accessible to fans for all time. Where I'm really frustrated, and this is what Jeff Gerstmann was talking about on Giant Bomb, where he says Nintendo used the commercial argument to hide behind any reaching out when it comes to linking up with organizations like the Video Game History Foundation.
Yeah.
And they just do not engage with them. They think that giving them access to, the raw data of these games, whatever you call that, like the initial builds and stuff, is like against their interests. And that's where it's really frustrating, because the Video Game History Foundation will do all the legwork when it comes to preservation and hard drive space and all that. All they need is the access from these big companies and the permission from these big companies to do it. And as a result, what happens is you get a million smaller Video Game History Foundations amongst collectors that are, in Nintendo's eyes, illegal. But what's frustrating from me as your average video game consumer is that it's not an official unified course of action. It's one-off people here and there, different smaller organizations, when what we need is one big organization that then gets the permissions and has the big companies like the Nintendos on their side, and they do the legwork when it comes to preservation and the museum aspect of it. And it should be a completely separate argument to anything commercial. And I think that, for me, is the most frustrating thing about Nintendo, is their lack of ability to care about the history of video games as a medium, and less so about the commercial aspect here and now.
Especially with Nintendo being like a core stone of the entire industry, right? Like a lot of video game history revolves around them as a company, so you would think that they would want to, shout about it a bit more, to like do a lot more interesting stuff with their games, right? We always talk about how like there are so many interesting collections out there of older games, and the Video Game History Foundation helps on some of these, of like preserving like original artwork from games, and documents, design documents, and interviews, and all these types of things that sometimes in a Contra collection or like these other collections of older video games that have all these resources, and then Nintendo are like, okay, let's put out these 3 Mario games. You can listen to the soundtracks, and that's it. And there's no like regard for their own history of these seminal games.
It's why I have so little sympathy with stuff like the data leaks. Like Nintendo pride themselves on, they take inspirations from so many other games and other resources and other cultures in the world. They take inspiration from all these things, but do we ever see how the sausage is made? No. But when these data leaks happen, it's like, oh my god, they were inspired by this, that, and the other. Look at how Link used to look. And it's like, this is super interesting stuff. And if Nintendo want to gatekeep, good luck to them. But they're going to get hacked, and people are going to find the stuff out. And it is interesting that Nintendo are starting a Nintendo museum in Kyoto.
Yeah.
But that's going to be the thinnest slice of the... It's going to be Hyrule Historia, but a museum potentially. Like, it'll be good. It'll be great. People will love it. People will flock there to see it. But it's still the very thin layer of icing on the very top of what is a much greater, larger, more interesting cake that we just never will have access to. And this is slightly different to the video game preservation argument, but I think it represents their culture that like everything is on their terms no matter what. Like they control everything when it comes to museum preservation, whatever. This whole Kyoto project, like, that is purely going to be them. That is purely going to be on their terms. And as long as these decisions are made by the very old Japanese men at Nintendo, I just don't see how this situation can change.
Yeah, it's really frustrating in so many ways. And it also speaks to like, well, Nintendo, okay, you want to get rid of these games so no one has access to them, and then you tell us, oh, just subscribe to our online service, which doesn't have all these games and is a very thin slice of your entire catalog. Oh, and then you also tell us that we can't emulate your games, even though there is no legitimate commercial way to purchase them anymore. You have given us zero avenue to do so legally, and yet you still say, oh no, you can't emulate, in which case I stick up my 2 middle fingers to Nintendo and say, fuck you, I'm going to emulate all your shit. Like, I do not give it a shit. If that's the attitude they're going to take, then I have no guilt whatsoever in emulating their stuff. None at all. Because if there's no way for me to legally give them money for it, then why do I care? And it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people, right? Like, Nintendo have always had a massive problem with emulation and with people hacking their hardware and with people pirating their software. Why do you think that is? It's because they make it so hard to access their older stuff legitimately. They just do such a poor job of it. And if they, the way to get around piracy, the way to make things like this go away, like with Netflix and with all these other services, is to create a service that is better, that is more convenient, that is easier to do than it is to go and pirate something. And Nintendo just haven't figured that out, right? And I don't know if they ever will. They feel like the company that will fight it without trying to come up with a solution that actually solves it. Like, they would rather try and do DMCA takedowns and like close down websites rather than create a service that stops those websites existing in the first place. And yeah, it's very, very frustrating. But the good thing is that because emulation exists, we can preserve these games somehow, right? Like, there is a way for you to do so. It's just, in the case of Nintendo games, because their hardware is so unique and different, it's always compromised when you do it on another piece of hardware. So, like, I can play DS games on my computer, no problem, but there's no touchscreen there, and like it's not the same experience as holding this machine that was built for this, or this game that was built for this hardware, this machine, and the stuff that it can do, right? Like, there is a uniqueness to seeing DS games on a DS, because that's what they were made for. And sure, I can emulate it by using a mouse on the screen, and that's basically an input for touch stuff, but it's not the same. Like, it doesn't feel the same. And the same with 3DS is even more so, because the entire concept of glasses-free 3D, unless you have a very expensive monitor or television that does that, you're not going to be able to make it in a way that makes sense, the way that the original hardware was able to do so. And so sure, yeah, I can play 3DS games via a computer at some point and get access to all that stuff, but I'm not going to get the same experience that I did when I was playing Pilot Wings at launch, you know, like seeing that 3D and having that add to the immersion, the experience, and like the handheld nature of it. It's something that's very, very frustrating. And it's always been an issue with Nintendo when bringing games forward to their future platforms. Like getting it to work, right? They put DS games on Wii U and there were like 7 different ways to view the screens. You could have like the top screen on a TV and the bottom screen on the pad, or like side by side on the screen. Like they were trying to make ways around it, but it's hard, you know? And if they hadn't had motion controls in the Switch, then they couldn't have done something like Skyward Sword in the same way. Obviously, they added the whole, like, button stuff. They also fucked that up, because the whole, like, notion of holding down a button to move the camera and then letting go of it to move the stick. Oh, God, it's a nightmare. I don't like playing Skyward Sword handheld because of that reason. It's probably the reason I've taken so long to get through it is because I have to sit down and play it in front of a TV or a screen in order to properly play it. But yeah, they will always run into these issues, and part of the reason we love them is because they do such unique, weird hardware. But because they make such unique, weird hardware, it's so hard to actually get access to those games in other ways. You can't have the same experience until the very far future, where there's stuff like the Analog Pocket that's just come out, which is basically a Game Boy, but a modern Game Boy. And I feel like in 15, 20 years, there will be companies like Analog making, okay, here's a DS, and you can take your original cartridges and use it using our Super DS that we made, that's the same, running on the same hardware and all that sort of stuff. Like, that's the only way I see forward for that sort of preservation.
It makes you wonder, why doesn't Nintendo just do their own Steam Deck that has zero to do with their current first-party output, and it is literally just a way to access their archived games, essentially. And it could be a monthly subscription, it could be a one-off payment, it could be its own eShop that they constantly invest to keep the servers up to date. But I'm not saying they won't have not thought about this, but it probably just doesn't make financial sense to them. I don't know.
I think it flies in the face of their philosophy, right? I think their philosophy has always been new thing good, old thing important, but let's focus on new thing. It's why you will not see them put Smash Melee remastered on Switch, because they want people to buy Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. You know, that is the product they are promoting. That is the product they want you to buy. It's the new thing. It's the best thing. They want you to go in that direction. And as soon as it becomes the outdated or outmoded, then they'll focus on the next new thing that they want you to focus on. And so they have an appreciation for their history, but not in a way that makes them want to put it out there it almost feels like it would distract from their modern stuff, right?
I think,
people being like, okay, well, we're going to have only all these classic games and you can get them for all this and they're easy to access and all that stuff. Then Nintendo would be afraid that people would just buy their old stuff because that's what people are familiar with and like.
It's a great counter, and it's like the reality of your Netflix example, where if they are genuinely worried about all these people pirating all their old games, then they could put out their own version that would just and people like me would definitely pick it up, and rather than try to go down the other route, because it's just it's that convenience. And sure, it might be an extra premium in terms of price, but if we had access to all those Nintendo, that'd be a really satisfying thing to play. And it's a very niche market. I can't defend that. Unlikely to happen perhaps.
But it's something that I feel there might eventually be a time when Nintendo makes something that gives you access to all that old stuff, but I think they would have to be in desperation mode, right? I think part of the reason why you don't see them focusing on that old stuff is because their new stuff is doing so well that they don't need to. There's no necessity here, right? It's basically a safety blanket for them, right? Like,
do you think that's why the Wii U and 3DS had such great virtual consoles?
Potentially. I think part of the craziness with those systems was, okay, here's a brand new system and we're going to support it for a bit, and then we're going to do a brand new system, we're going to support it for a little bit. That's always been the way they've done it, but I don't know, it did feel like they were giving stuff away almost. Metroid Prime Trilogy launched on the Wii U and they were like, it's half price, $8.99 for these 3 fucking Metroid games. Like, it was wild. Like, they were giving away games, if you bought another game.
It was buy one, get one free with like Mario Kart 8 and Wind Waker HD, I think I picked up. Or did I pick up Pikmin? I think I picked up Wind Waker HD and you also picked it up.
I did, yeah. And it was just, the floodgates were open then for that sort of stuff. But even then, it was still a compromised virtual console. It was nowhere near the depth or breadth of the Wii virtual console. They just didn't have access to it. And for me, the biggest bummer from a perspective of someone who likes older games and likes going back and playing stuff is the digital exclusive stuff. It's the stuff like Harmonite or like Pocket Card Jockey or like Fluidity Spin Cycle, things that were made specifically for the 3DS, never got ported anywhere else, likely will not be returned to because they're quite niche and small, are just going to disappear for fucking ever. No one is going to be able to access those in a legitimate way anymore. And that sucks, because that is like legitimate parts of history of, you know, the platform of games that were released on it that just don't exist anymore. And if you want to play them, you have to find a workaround. You have to go the illegal route to do so. That's the frustrating aspect. Cause
do you care from the perspective of gamers will never be able to play them again, or as long as that ROM is kept in a museum, you're satisfied, or you want both?
I think it's both, really, right? Like, I think people should be able to play these if they want. Like, when you look at other industries and you compare it to video games, it's like, well, I guess this probably did happen back in the day with films and stuff, but it's like, because people were recording over reels and those types of things, it was like,
right,
you know, if you couldn't watch like Kill Bill, like, it's like, oh no, they discontinued it because the hardware doesn't, so no one can watch it anymore. And it would be like, what the fuck? Like, that's insanity. Like, same with music, same with books. Like, you think about any other industry in terms of media, and this just sounds fucking insane when you think about that, right? Like, you can't access it. There's no way to play this thing. There's no way to legitimately, you know, find a way to access it. It's just absolutely ridiculous.
I think it's one of the ways in which it is a shame that video games are such a young industry in comparison to film, books, TV, however you want to compare it. Like, it feels mad in this moment. I can see this issue getting better in 20 to 30 years time, as I do think there is a growing increase in the cultural importance and relevance of video games. Like, the more we're on that trajectory, the more importance will be emphasized on the history, the culture, and preserving it. And we're not there yet, but I think, you know, the moves are in the right direction, even if the practicalities aren't.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what Xbox is doing is great, right? Their backwards compatibility stuff and trying to preserve as much stuff as possible. They're really the only platform who cares about it at the moment. And it's awesome that they're doing that stuff. Like, the idea that you can take an original Xbox disc, put it in your current console, and it will let you play that. Wild shit. Like, it's awesome. That's such a good thing that more systems should allow for. And it's obviously harder from Nintendo's perspective because you can't fucking stick a Wii U disc in your Switch as much as you want to try and do so. It's just not going to go in there, is it? So, yeah, you know, like, having that sort of backwards compatibility is not really...
Yeah. And this will be probably the last generation that does that for Xbox, as I imagine their next system, if it is a system, will be completely discless, just like the Series S is.
Potentially, yeah. And then everything is digital, and like your entire... But like, you think about it, on PC, people have Steam accounts, and it's not like... I mean, it's not going to go away necessarily. Like, the way that works is that you should really have access to these games forever and ever. I think that's the joy of having open hardware like the PC, is the ability to never really lose anything, right? Like,
that is the theory. I think in practice, time will tell. But
yeah,
like that is still server space somewhere that needs maintained and updated, right. And
you know, when the apocalypse comes and all the servers in the world are destroyed, yes, then everything is gone. Like, nothing exists anymore.
Like, it will degrade regardless of when the apocalypse comes, is my point. But yeah,
right. But they're always making new servers, right? They're always restoring and moving things over. There's always backups.
Yes, but that is in Steam's interest, but it costs a lot of money, and it is in their interest. The problem is for Nintendo, it's not.
Yeah, I'm not sure you realize how much money Valve makes off of Steam, given the amount of servers that they'd have to actually work with. I think they're fine when it comes to doing that stuff.
I agree at the moment, but like, say they become an unsuccessful company in the next decade. I'm not saying that's going to happen.
Yeah, no.
It becomes harder and tougher to maintain these things. It is their modus operandi at the moment. It will remain so for the foreseeable future, but it's still not infinite. It's far off, and that is concerning.
Yeah, there's always ways in which these things can fail, but like, at least with the PC, it feels more stable, right? It feels like it's something that will last because there's just so much that you can do in terms of those systems and those games. Whereas with a closed off ecosystem, it's a lot trickier, and that's what Nintendo run into, of like, oh well, we have to change things now, and we have to close down these servers because it's just too much of a hassle to keep it going. And yeah, all of it is built on old architecture and hardware. Bali, are there anything, like any games from Wii U or 3DS that you have been eyeing and thinking, well, I wanted to get to that at some point, but I haven't, that you will want to pick up before these stores go away? Because I feel like you are far less interested in going back to these things than I am. I have a giant fucking list of like 50 games of like, I want to have these or have access to them in some way.
There are a few things, and I by and large, and maybe I've just been drinking the Nintendo Kool-Aid too long, but I by and large do agree that most things that I will probably want to play in the future will be made accessible to me by hook or by crook.
Okay.
And that's frustrating, but it probably will happen. However, I do think it would be worth my time to potentially pick up Advance Wars DS and Advance Wars Days of Ruin, of which I think both are on the Wii U Virtual Console at this point in time. So rather than trying to pick up very expensive DS versions online, I'd probably go after those two. I know they're probably quite easy to like hack and ROM and play illegally, but
yes, but you don't know any of those things.
I don't know any of those things and whatever. Plus it's a DS game, so maybe it'd be nice to play with the Wii U screen.
Right.
So yeah, I think those are probably two. Other than that, I think the Kirby games on 3DS would be nice to play.
For sure,
Either if we do that through a backlog club could be fun, or if we just play those independently anyway. I think like
that's the other thing, right? Of like things like backlog club, of like, oh, I want to go back and play this 3DS eShop game. Well, you can't anymore. You know, it's really, it sucks. You know,
really sucks. And like you said about Pilot Wings, like to play those Kirby games in 3D would be really nice. We are big fans of the 3D on 3DS, and knowing that, you know, the time has come that 3D on 3DS will be no more, that is going to be sad. And to maybe play two more 2.5D games, which I think has always been just a really great use of the 3D, is those 2.5D games.
Yes,
that could be really nice, a nice swan song for it. So those are probably like the four games I'd think of. I can't think of any big ones off the top of my head that I've missed.
Yeah, there are some good videos out there that people like John from Good Vibes Gaming has done a couple of videos, one for Wii U, one for 3DS, going through a ton of different games that are worth picking up. Obviously, you know, we played stuff like Pushmo and Box Boy, but there are multiple sequels to both of those games, multiple versions of those that people can check out on Wii U as well. There's Pushmo World, which was a totally different game, and that stuff is
a lot of the bigger ones. They get remade or redone. Like we just talked about Nintendo Switch Sports in the first segment. You know, that's a 2007 Wii game. Like
exactly.
That's what I mean. Where I do think Nintendo remake and remaster and port the really big stuff. But you're right. It's those slightly more niche, deeper cuts. And I'm confident those Kirby games will come along at some point. But at the same time, there's so many Kirby games that they don't really necessarily get ported in the same way.
Yeah, one that I'm going to shout out that maybe you'll be interested in is Nintendo Pocket Football Club, which was this tiny little 3DS football game that seemed really cool and a lot of people really loved, and I think that might be something you'd be interested in. But yeah, I've got an enormous list, and a lot of stuff that I wanted to pick up. I was always like waiting for sales on certain types of games, and Atlas have actually been doing some super deep discounted sales of the last couple of years on 3DS. So I already have stuff like Etrian Odyssey 5, Radiant Historia, Seventh Dragon, like a few like really deep cut RPGs. Interested in like the Persona Q games as well, because those go quite expensive. In terms of the bigger games, both the Kirby games, of course, but also they remade Epic Yarn on 3DS, and I think that's probably the best way to play Epic Yarn in this day and age. Like going back to the Wii version, sure, there's also the Wii version that you could buy through the Wii U shop, so I could get that version, or I could get the 3DS version of Epic Yarn, because I've never played that game, and that game seems like it's quite good.
Strange that was ported to 3DS, you're right.
They did it with Yoshi's Woolly World as well, right? And obviously Donkey Kong on Wii, they put that on 3DS. There's weirdly a lot of Wii games that made their way to 3DS in a strange situation. situation there. Tomodachi Life I've always been interested in. That's one I want to check out. The original Monster Hunter Stories, I feel like that's more likely to get ported because they put the second game on Switch, so I feel like Stories Remastered is likely, as well as Capcom owns that, so I think they have more vested interest in giving access to stuff like that to a wider people. Always been interested in the original Bravely Default and Bravely Second, as it's called, not Bravely Default 2. So, like, that's another big RPG. Style Savvy is a series that seems like it is not for me or us at all, but apparently is quite good. So I've always been interested in a Style Savvy game. And the Professor Layton games, of course. I have Miracle Mask, but I don't have the Azran Legacy. So those are some of the ones from retail of big games. In terms of digital stuff, the most important 3DS digital games that I think are the most interesting are a series called the Guild series. And I have known about this series for a long, long time. I never picked them up because they were never on sale, and I was kind of waiting for that to happen. And they're not going on sale now, and they're going to disappear, so I'm going to buy them all now. This was a set of games published by Level 5, and a lot of them were made by famous individual Japanese creators. So like Suda51 made one of these games, or like at least worked on it. And you have like other really famous Japanese auteurs or like well-known designers working on these projects. So there's a series of them. You can get, I think, a physical version in Japan, but you can't get that anywhere else. And there were 2 runs of it. So there was Guild 01, which includes 4 games, and Guild 02, which includes 3 games. And yeah, they're all supposedly really interesting projects, very small projects, but like focusing on individual elements. So one's called Aeroporter, and you're basically sorting luggage at an airport. One is Crimson Shroud, that's like a D&D style RPG. There's Attack of the Friday Monsters, which is like an almost like anime style kaiju thing where the small town gets invaded by monsters. Liberation Maiden, you play as the president, who's a teenage girl in a mech and just destroys things, and a bunch of others. Weapon Shop de Omase, which you are running a weapon shop where RPG characters come in and buy stuff from your weapon shop. Really fascinating, interesting concept. So all the Guild games, they are on my hit list, and I will be picking up all of them. And then you have digital stuff like, as I mentioned, Harmonite. You got Pocket Card Jockey, Nintendo Pocket Football Club, Fluidity Spin Cycle, alongside games like the Denpamen. The Denpamen was this really weird, bizarre AR experiment game where you would see these little kind of guys in your 3DS camera, and they'd be like going around the world, but then also it was a whole RPG where you'd collect them and they'd go on an adventure. There are 3 Denpamen games. There's bizarre stuff going on there. There's also shout out. So this is from John from GVG did talk about DSiWare, because the DSiWare shop only lives on through the 3DS at the moment because they closed down the DSiWare shop. But you can still buy DSiWare on 3DS. And the best one that I saw that he pointed out is a game called Dragon Quest Wars that I didn't even know existed.
What a name.
It's a turn-based tactics Dragon Quest game for DSiWare. And I was like, holy shit, I've never heard of this before. So that is on my list straight away. I'm definitely going to get that. And yeah, certain DLC is going to go away as well. So DLC for the Phoenix Wright games, DLC for all the Fire Emblem games. Holy shit, there's so much DLC for Awakening and for Fates on 3DS. As well as Final Fantasy Theater Rhythm, which obviously is a game that has a lot of Final Fantasy music in it. Ton of DLC for that you can pick up. There's so much stuff out there. For me, stuff like 3D Afterburner I'm going to pick up because I played the original Afterburner 2 back on the Amiga that my cousin owned, that I was a big fan of. Tokyo Crash Mobs is this bizarre game where there's a bunch of like Japanese people that you kind of throw them into each other like bowling pins. It's a really strange thing. Kirby Blowout Blast is like an expansion of one of the mini games from one of the Kirby games on 3DS that got its own thing. There are a bunch of like Kirby games that were kind of mini games expanded into their whole own thing. Basically what I'm saying is there's a fucking lot of stuff here, and so much of it is great. So much of it is worth going back to just for either historical curiosity or just because the games are interesting and fun to play. So yeah, I have put aside a lot of cash to just go through and buy a lot of stuff. I've been looking at physical stuff as well. Obviously, I picked up stuff like WarioWare Gold cheap, Federation Force. I got Ever Oasis, Fantasy Life I found the other day for 15 quid, which feels like a fucking steal because that game goes for really high prices elsewhere. So yeah, obviously the physical market you can keep an eye on, but if you want to guarantee get a game and you don't want to worry about chasing down prices, just go on the eShop if you have money to set aside, which I understand not everyone does, but there's definitely some really good stuff. So look into it, figure out what you want to get, and just make sure you grab it before it goes, because it's, really for me, it's the next 3 months or so, because when credit card stuff goes away, it's just going to make it harder and more annoying to do, and you can't do exact prices then you have to be like doing increments of 10, and so you're like losing money, unless obviously, I mean, with a joined wallet it means you can use it on Switch anyway, but it just feels bad. It's much better to individually buy the games and just pay the exact amount for them on the web portal through the website. So as
you say, if you have leftover, if you can spend that leftover on Switch, you're right, it does feel a bit better.
It helps to some degree. So anyway, there's so many things that we're going to lose, and it sucks, and it's bad, and it's way too early. Like you said, Bally, like there's no good expectation for them to do this forever, but like, why can't they do it in 5 years' time? Like give us a longer period.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable middle ground for sure. This is very soon. It's especially, you think they were releasing very high profile 3DS games even in like 2017, 2018. That's only 4 years ago. Like that's not that long ago, and this just seems very soon. And Nintendo are no fun when they get drunk on their own success, and this is just one of those decisions. They're like, well, we're doing so well with the Switch, who cares about the 3DS and Wii U eShops? Let's just close them up and save that money and invest it in something Switch related. And yeah, I think it's not the best way to treat fans, especially when we know how hardcore so many Nintendo fans are, not just us. Like there are so many of them out there, and it'd be nice that these poor Nintendo fans, including us, we just get abused by Nintendo so much. It's a really abusive relationship we're in, and so will it continue.
Yes, yeah, it continues, and there's obviously not much we can do about it, as evidenced of people just not really pushing back that much, because we know how it's going to end. Last shout out I'm going to give, this is a fun kind of story associated with this, but I entered an IGN blog contest about 10 years ago, and wrote about like the new Super Mario Brothers series and how shit it was, basically, and I won the writing contest on IGN, and Audrey Drake, who worked there at the time, reached out and was like, hey, you won this, you win a game code. And I was like, great, I want Sakura Samurai, because that was a new 3DS eShop game that had just come out, and that was one of the ones that she had. She's like, great, I'll get it to you. And then she's like, oh, it's American only. And I was like, I live in the UK, that won't work on my eShop. So I ended up not getting it. So I think I have to buy that now to finally get my copy of Sakura Samurai, which I was promised.
They didn't plan for a non-American winning. You fooled their system.
Exactly. Yeah, I was too case, because I was born in the country where English existed. So not in America where they bastardize the language. So anyway, that's going to close us out for the show. Thanks everybody for listening. It's been fun going through all this stuff. Packed show today, a lot of fun stuff to talk about. But let's get on out of here, Bally, and tell the fine folks where they can find us and find our stuff. If you would like to support the show financially, then you can support us at Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife, get some bonus episodes there, some extra stuff, and some fun things, then you can go to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife. And Bally, we would like to thank some of our patrons.
Yes, thank you to our $10 tier patrons. They are Zach S., Atari Alex, Thomas, Matthew, and my wife Caroline. Thank you all for your $10 tier support, but also thank you to all of our other patrons. It's so awesome the way that you all support the show, and we're hugely grateful. I should say our most recent episode of ThisNintendoLife talked about some of my first impressions of Horizon Forbidden West, which is a little old open world game that's just come out recently.
Absolutely.
Head on over there and you can access all those episodes of Nintendo-Life for a single $1. It's definitely worth it.
Absolutely. So go do that. You can also find us in various places on the internet. You can go to Twitter and find me at LordNBZ, where really I'm just going to be tweeting about Elden Ring, I think, for a while, and just the weird shit that I found. Found a little cave with some turtle boys in it, and there was a talisman that just increased my stamina that looked like a turtle. It was delightful. In a world of horror and decay, I love that I can find a little turtle cave and have fun. So you can follow me there at LordNBZ.
Were they like horrifying looking turtles, or were they turtle-looking turtles?
Oh no, they're cute. They're little turtle boys. They're quite big actually. They're large turtles, in fact.
Okay.
I saw someone walking around with a shield that was a turtle shield, and I was like, "Did you kill a turtle boy to get that?" Because in which case, that seems very, very disappointing. So because I don't want to kill those little boys. They're very, very nice. Bally, where can they find you on Twitter?
Find me on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. I've been tweeting about all sorts of stuff recently. A bit of this, bit of that, whatever.
Bit of politics, bit of games.
Bit of politics. So much politics in the world right now. Goodness.
Oh yeah.
Not the good kind.
No.
Is there a good kind? I'm not sure there's a good kind.
Rarely is the good kind. But you can find the podcast Twitter at TNL Podcast. That's where you can go for links to our Discord, to our YouTube channel, as well as just updates generally about the show and our Patreon episodes and all those types of things that are going on. Check it on out. You can find the show in various places. We're on Spotify, we're on Stitcher, can be listened to via any pod catching app, Pocket Casts, Overcast, all those types of things. Go subscribe, listen, rate, all the goodness, and we would greatly appreciate it because it's nice when people find the show. A few people joining our Discord recently and finding the show, which is nice. So yeah, very good to reach out to new audiences and new people. Cool. I think that pretty much does it in terms of what we have and what we've been doing. I feel like the next kind of month of video games for us is like you're in one big open world game, I'm in another, and we're gonna kind of see how things go and come out the other side.
And then Kirby is in the distance.
Kirby is coming. Also, Triangle Strategy is really fucking cool. I need to get started on that demo. Oh my god. Yeah, looking forward to that. That's
coming like March
time.
4th or something. So.
Yeah, very, very. It's like a week away. So I need to start the demo, get my save to the point, and then put all that demo progress over, which is really nice. So looking forward to it. So yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking about that next time. But until then, thanks everybody for listening. We will see you very soon. Bye-bye, folks. The musical interludes used on today's show were Cassiopeia Was Over Keel from If Found, copyright Dreamfeel 2020, and The Prelude from Final Fantasy 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls, copyright Square Enix 2004.
You can also post a comment, a question in our Discord server. There's a whole channel dedicated to that. You can join from our description. That made no sense. I'm going to start again. It's just like word salad.
Word salad.